Good evening. The meeting will come to order. Welcome all to this especially set meeting of the Citizen Review Committee. Today is Tuesday, June 11, 2013. It's 5:45 by my watch, 5:47 by the clock in the back of the hearing room. My name is Jamie Troy. I'm chair of the Citizen Review Committee, and I'd like to welcome you all here this evening for a specially set appeal hearing on case number 2013-X-0001. We started the meeting a little late this evening. As I understand, our appellant has had some transportation difficulties and is on her way. In consultation with Ms. Swift, her volunteer advocate, we understand that the appellant has endorsed a plan of us starting, and she will join us. We delayed the beginning of this hearing in order to try to give her a little opportunity to not be too far out. As is our tradition at the beginning of these meetings, I'd like to go around the room and have people who are willing to do so introduce themselves for the record. We are recording this proceeding. We'll also send around, we may or may not send around a list for people to sign their names to help us with spelling. Independent Police Review takes meeting minute notes for us, so you're not required to identify yourself for the record. If you do not wish to do so, you're welcome to pass. But if you are willing to do so, if you could please state your name so we know who's here for our minutes. My name is Jamie Troy. I live in Northeast Portland. I'm a member of the committee. I will move to my right.
Jeff Isnet, CRC member, North Portland, St. John's.
Rodney Paris, CRC member, Northwest Portland.
Michelle Silver, CRC member, Southwest Portland.
And Dan Hannon with Portland Cop Watch.
Regina Hannon, Portland Cop Watch. Teresa Baldwin. Emma Redundant. Kathy Marr.
Jim Young.
Leland Baxter Neal, I'm a law student at Wilson Park Law School.
Shara Kirby, National Lawyers Guild. Nancy Bernstein, Oregonian.
Rudolph Jeffries, I'm a law student at
Jeffries.
Roberto Rivera, Portland resident.
Howard Terrell, a former CRC member, currently serving in an APA role.
Morgan Lord, resident of Portland.
I will come back up to the table.
Lieutenant Vincent Maurice, precinct.
Jeff Bell with Internal Affairs.
Captain Dave, famous professional standards division.
Brianna Smith, MLG Volunteer Advocate.
Constantine Severe, IPR.
Lily Reese, Deputy City Attorney.
And I'll move off the table into the back here.
Ricardo Mahoney.
Nicole Brown, Community Organizer with the Center for Intercultural Organizing.
Patrick Kane, citizen.
Mary Schmidt, Citizen Portland.
Andrew Ryder with the Center for Intercultural Organizing.
Rosa Martinez with Center for Intercultural Organizing.
Pierce Whitehead, Portland Citizen.
Mike Tabor with Portland Cop Watch and Indie Media.
Ted Lubin, Southwest Portland.
Calais Rubin, Southwest Portland, Citizen.
Mike Adams, Bingham Citizen Review Committee.
Steve Yarosh, I'm a member of the CRC.
David Deneke, Northwest Portland, CRC.
Welcome all. Tonight we are here for an appeal hearing. Some folks were present last Wednesday when we had initially scheduled this appeal hearing. There was some confusion or miscommunication, and we didn't have command staff here, so thank you, Lieutenant Elmore, for being here this evening. Necessary attendee to conduct an appeal hearing, so we look forward to your comments. For anyone who is interested in knowing how we're going to conduct this evening's appeal, if you have access to the protocols which are available online or printed out if you're me, I'm referring to Protocol 5.03, which walks us through this evening's appeal. So I'm just going to identify and go through all of this in sort of tedious fashion to make sure that everyone is on the same page about how we're going to conduct this evening's affairs. So we have participants for tonight's appeal. I, as the chair, can impose time limits if necessary, though I'm hopeful I won't need to do that. I will start off the evening by asking Steve Yarosh to give the case summary presentation. The case summary is a written summary by CRC members. Myself and Steve worked on this together to try to give an impartial, non-biased explanation of the substance of the appeal, which we're here this evening to decide upon. The contents of the case summary in draft form were provided to both the appellant and the Police Bureau and IPR in advance. There are timelines that are necessary to be relied upon there, and we were able to receive any feedback and incorporate that into the case summary prior to this evening's appeal hearing. We'll then take a statement from the appellant or from Ms. Swift. If the appellant has not yet joined us this evening, it would be my likely, if we don't have the appellant here, I will give her an opportunity to speak to us directly out of turn to try to be even-handed. We'll then take a statement by the respondent officer or a representative of that officer. I don't believe we're going to have that accused officer here this evening, or a representative of that accused officer here this evening. I'll turn to Lieutenant Bell for an outline of the investigation that was done by Internal Affairs. I'll turn to then Lieutenant Elmore for an explanation of the command staff's finding. IPR has an opportunity to comment, and then I will ask Mr. Yarosh to recite the allegations, the findings that were made by the Bureau, and the options available to the CRC in reviewing those findings. Then the CRC will have a question and discussion session. As we get ready and nearer to voting, we'll take public comments prior to a vote. Then we'll offer rebuttal comments to the appellant, to the involved officer, or to Internal Affairs and the Bureau Command. Ms. Reese is here to remind us of the standards of proof and identification of issues to be addressed. We'll have one more question and clarification session, and then we will vote whether to affirm or challenge or refer the case back for further investigation. I would note for those present for the case file review, members did not believe there was need for further investigation at that time. However, the appellant does have the ability to offer material witnesses, and if that were to happen, that could lead to a new take on the matter. So, that's how we're going to conduct this evening's affairs. I hope I didn't put you all to sleep and explain all of that to you. And I'm now going to turn to Mr. Yarosh and ask him to read through our case summary presentation.
Okay, thank you. The summary presentation. This summary is intended to be a brief overview of the case at the heart of this appeal. It highlights the timeline and related events of the case. It includes the allegations filed against the Portland Police Bureau and the reasons the complainant, appellant, requested an appeal with the Citizen Review Committee. The members of the CRC individually reviewed the Independent Police Review's files and those of the Police Bureau's Internal Investigation Division. Included in the files were all correspondence relating to the case. Also reviewed was the Bureau's Manual of Policy and Procedure. On March 6, 2013, after reviewing the case files, CRC held a case file review during which IA and IPR made a presentation of the case. Following those presentations, the CRC determined that the case file was ready for an appeal hearing and scheduled the appeal. Incident. Complaint summary. Officer key. Officer A involved, subject of the investigation. Officer B involved, subject of the investigation. Appellant is here today claiming she was stopped for no reason, subjected to excessive force, subjected to an unreasonable search of herself and her backpack without permission, and being rudely treated by Officer A. The CRC is limited to reviewing only those claims which were accepted for investigation by the chain of command. Accordingly, the CRC will not be addressing any of the appellant's other claims, i.e. unnecessary stop and detainer, which were declined for investigation by the chain of command. A summary of the facts is as follows. Officers A and B, while on patrol, heard a call a little before 10 a.m. on February 17, 2012, of a suspicious person rifling through mailboxes in the area of Southeast 77th and Steele. The report described the suspect as an Hispanic male, late 30s, 5'4" to 5'6", thin build, wearing a cream-colored beanie, a black jacket, and carrying a black backpack, headed towards Southeast Foster. Appellant is an African-American female, standing 4'10" tall, who had apparently gotten off one bus and was waiting for another near the corner of Northeast 82nd and Foster that morning. The bus stop was near a Wells Fargo ATM machine. As she describes herself that morning, she was wearing a short black jacket with fur trim around the hood, a black and white backpack, and a brown knitted hat underneath her hood. She was also holding a silver-colored coffee travel mug. Officers A and B observed appellant and, believing she matched the description of the suspicious person, approached and asked her to produce some identification. Appellant questioned why she was being contacted and their authority to stop or search her. Appellant describes the interaction as follows. Appellant was standing under the ATM awning when she was approached by the officers, who she initially thought were approaching to use the ATM. Officer A asked her where she was coming from. She told him she was just waiting for the bus and did not need to talk to him. This exchange repeated. Officer A tells her more forcefully that he wants to know what is in her bag. She placed the backpack on the ground and called her son by cell phone to inform him she was being harassed by police for no reason, asking him to come to her aid. According to appellant, while talking to her son, Officer A grabbed her. She began struggling with both officers and eventually was taken to the ground, placed in handcuffs, and subjected to a search of her person and backpack without permission. During this incident, appellant called out to passersby, asking them to record the interaction and to call 911. During this exchange, as appellant was protesting and asserting her rights, Officer A told her, "You don't have no fucking rights." Appellant also reports that she was groped in her private areas by Officers A and B when they searched her. Appellant also indicates that it was only after she was placed in handcuffs that she heard of the report of mail being stolen. A few minutes later, a show-up was conducted, where the individuals who observed and reported the person rifling through mailboxes were brought to the scene and asked whether appellant was the person who was going through the mailboxes. The witnesses could not confirm whether appellant was the person they saw going through the mailboxes, and appellant was thereafter released. Officer A's account of the incident is as follows. He describes himself as the trainer on patrol with his trainee that day. They heard the radio report about a person rifling through mailboxes and began checking the area. When they came to Southeast 82nd and Foster, they saw a subject matching the description, wearing a cream-colored beanie, black jacket, and even looked like a Hispanic male. As they approached, the suspect walked from the bus bench to the Wells Fargo ATM on the west side of the bank. The officers approached the suspect as she stood by the ATM, and Officer A did all of the talking. He told her she was not free to go and tried to explain what was going on. He told her he would like her name, but instead of providing identification, she got on the telephone. He asked her to get off the phone and give him her name. He told her if she did not give him her name, he would search her for her name or get her name from her backpack. She quickly reached for the backpack, so both officers grabbed her. When they grabbed her arms, she flailed. Pulling away from Officer B, She began screaming at the top of her lungs about her constitutional rights being violated and asking passers-by to videotape the exchange. Officer A placed her in a wrist lock in order to regain control of her, and they handcuffed her, placing her in custody. They did not take her to the ground or use any other force. They searched her person and her backpack. The search was a search incident to arrest. Officer A does not recall telling appellant, "You have no fucking rights." He does recall some type of exchange and might have said something off the wall, potentially along the lines of, "You have the right to remain silent and to exercise that." Officer B, who wrote the police report about this incident, was interviewed by Internal Affairs. Describes himself as being on patrol with Officer A when he heard a call about a Hispanic male in the area going through mailboxes. He heard the same description as Officer A. He noticed the appellant standing at the corner of Southeast 82nd and Foster and believed she matched the description. They made a U-turn to contact the appellant, and when they did this, she walked from the bus stop to the Wells Fargo ATM. They approached her, and Officer A asked for ID. Officer B noticed the appellant's hand begin to shake and asked Officer A, why? At that point, Officer A tells her she is not free to go and that she matches the description of the suspect they are looking for. Appellant indicated she had to call someone and makes a call. Officer A asked her to hang up the phone and produce ID. She ignored the command, and Officer A offered to get her ID out of her backpack and reached for the backpack. As he did this, appellant lunged for the backpack. As she lunged for the backpack, both officers took her by the arm and stopped her from grabbing her backpack. Appellant began yelling and screaming at the top of her lungs about her rights. At that point, she was handcuffed for interfering with a police officer and disorderly conduct. He said her jacket was slippery and that he struggled to put her hands behind her back to place her in handcuffs, describing it as quite a long struggle. He felt badly that her coffee spilled during this exchange and apologized to appellant for this after the fact. Incident to arrest, appellant was searched and her backpack was searched, and she was placed into the back of a patrol car. A witness showed up on the scene and had trouble identifying appellant as a person who was rifling through mailboxes, but said her appearance was very close. After this, the officers decided not to charge her for the disorderly or interference charges and released her to TriMet officers based upon property found in her backpack. Officer B does not recall any rude language being used in this exchange, nor does he recall appellant complaining of any injuries, though he does recall her commenting that she would file a complaint over the interaction. The timeline for the case is as follows. February 17th, 2012 is the date of the incident. May 5th, 2012, complainant contacted Bureau of Emergency Communications regarding the incident and was referred to IPR. On that same day, May 1st, 2012, the Bureau of Emergency Communications notifies IPR of complainant's call. On May the 4th, 2012, IPR opens an investigation, and on June the 8th, 2012, IPR initial investigation is completed. On June the 13th of 2012, the complaint is assigned to Internal Affairs for investigation, and on September 24th, 2012, the Internal Affairs investigation is complete. On October 24th, 2012, the RU finding is made. On November 2nd, 2012, the date of Internal Affairs recommended findings occurs. On December 18th, 2012, the date of IPR recommended findings takes place. January 8th, 2013, the disposition letter is dated and sent. On January 24th, 2013, this appeal is filed by the complainant. On March 6, 2013, the case file review was held by CRC. The summary of the complainant's allegations are as follows. Allegations against Officer A. Allegation number 1, Officer A used unnecessary force. Allegation type, force. The second allegation against Officer A is that Officer A conducted an improper search. Allegation type, conduct. And the third allegation against Officer A is that Officer A was rude. Allegation type, courtesy. And this narrative describes the allegations made. Appellant alleges that Officer A grabbed her arm and took her to the ground in making an arrest after refusing to explain why he was contacting her. He and Officer B then searched her person and her backpack without waiting for a female officer to conduct the search. She alleges that he groped her in her private parts during this interaction. She states that Officer A told her, "You don't have no fucking rights," during this encounter. Officer A stated that appellant refused to identify herself after being told he was conducting an investigation, and that she was not free to go, and that he grabbed her arm only after she refused to hang up the phone and quickly reached for her backpack. Officer A said the search was conducted incident to arrest and was not overly intrusive. Officer A did not recall telling appellant anything about no fucking rights, but indicated he might have said something in response to her. The commander's findings on the allegations against Officer A were as to unnecessary force, exonerated. As to conducted an improper search, exonerated with debriefing. As to rudeness, exonerated. The complainant's allegations against Officer B are: 1, Officer B used unnecessary force, and 2, Officer B conducted an improper search. The narrative in describing those allegations is as follows. Appellant alleges that Officer B grabbed her other arm and took her to the ground in making an arrest after Officer A refused to explain why they were contacting her. He and Officer A then searched her person and her backpack without waiting for a female officer to conduct the search. She complained that he groped her in her private parts during this interaction, though he did not take her clothes off, and conducted this search in public. Officer B stated that appellant refused to identify herself after being told they were conducting an investigation, and that she was not free to go, and that he grabbed her arm only after she quickly reached for her backpack. Officer B said the search was conducted incident to arrest and was not overly intrusive. The commander's findings as to the allegations against Officer B are: as to allegation number 1, force, exonerated. As to allegation number 2, improper search, exonerated with debriefing. The definitions of the possible findings that could be made on these allegations are as follows. Unproven, which means that the allegation is not proven by a preponderance of the evidence. Unproven with the debriefing, which means that while the allegation is not proven by a preponderance of the evidence, a critique of that complaint should be conducted with the involved officer. Exonerated means the actions of the officer were within Bureau policy and procedure. Exonerated with debriefing means that while the actions of the officer were within Bureau policy and procedure, a critique of the complaint should be conducted with the involved officer. The last choice is sustained, which means that the officer was found to be in violation of policy or procedure. This hearing, The purpose of the hearing is to hear the substantive issues involved in the case. CRC members hear from the appellant, bureau members, IPR, internal affairs, and the public. In preparing for this hearing, the CRC reviews the complete case file compiled by both IPR and internal affairs. These files include transcripts and recordings from interviews, police reports, and other supporting material. In considering the appeal, the CRC has three options. One, the CRC can affirm the findings of the RU command. Two, the CRC can challenge the findings of the RU commander. And three, the CRC can request additional investigation to gather additional information to be able to come to a decision. Each CRC member votes individually on a motion for one of these three options and should explain their vote at the time it is made.
Thank you, Steve. So I'm now going to look to our volunteer advocate. And we'll take a statement by the appellant, a chosen representative of the appellant, and any material witnesses proffered by the appellant.
Okay, the appellant was first going to start off by giving a playback of what happened to her and her experience. In the event that she shows up, I want to still give her the chance to say that in her own words, so I was going to just bring up a few procedural and investigative issues that she had with the case. One of the appeal procedure issues that she wanted to bring up was PSF 5.03 states that the appeal must be filed within 30 days of the complainant receiving notification from IPR regarding the disposition of the case. On January 8th, she received a letter that the disposition was found, but unfortunately the letter didn't contain the actual findings from IA. There was a January 16th letter which confirmed that there was a mix-up and the disposition wasn't included in the January 8th letter. So it wasn't until January 16th, the January 16th dated letter was received by Ms. Haynes that she actually knew what the findings were. On January 14th, 2 days before she found out what the findings were, it stated that she needed to file an appeal by January 23rd. So if you count those days, it's about 7 days rather than 30 days for her to file her appeal. So she was just worried that that might dissuade a lot of potential appellants from wanting to go through with the CRC appeal. So she wanted to voice that concern. She was worried that it would give appellants inadequate time to get counsel and consider their circumstances as well, which might dissuade them. There was another investigative issue that she had. She was going to discuss in her testimony that when she was frisked, they actually frisked her underneath her clothing, and as defined by Oregon Revised Statute 131.605, a frisk is an external padding of the outer clothing. So it was, she thinks, outside of frisking authority to go underneath her jacket. In addition, there was a few allegations of a few directives that she feels weren't fully investigated. One of those was retaliation under section 310.20, and that section reads, in order to maintain community credibility, it is essential citizens do not fear retaliation by Bureau members, including reporting misconduct and asking for members' names and or Bureau ID. Ms. Haynes reports that after she had told officers that she wanted their names, that the officers became hostile with her and told her that you better not pursue this. You need to stop pissing us off, and that you should be happy we're not taking you in, arresting her. She feels that this was retaliatory, and I know that the allegation that there was photographs taken, of course, IA said that they were unable to find any photographs. She thinks that that was because they weren't formally taken on any police camera, but rather on cell phones. So she thinks that this was potentially a retaliatory measure in place to put fear in her because she requested their names and their badge numbers. So I don't know how we can find that out if there was no photographs on file, but she says it was taken on their cell phones. She thought that the police were documenting what she looked like, so if they saw her in the future, they could continue with their conduct. So she was really fearful of this at the time anyways. Ms. Haynes is involved in a lot of community projects here in Portland where she discusses police encounters and is involved in other aspects with the community with regard to law enforcement community involvement. So she had been hearing stories about some fearful issues that had happened and, just hearing it through the grapevines. And so she already had a sense of fear prior to this occurrence, and it kind of enhanced that. Another directive that she feels wasn't investigated was the duty to report. Section 1010.20 states that a member who takes a person to the ground by applying force must complete a force data collection report. There was no statement in IA's findings that she was taken to the ground or not, though IPR's summary has the officer stating that one officer stating that she was not taken to the ground. This may have no bearing, but Oregon Revised Statute 810.410 states that a police officer may use the degree of force reasonably necessary to make the stop and ensure the safety of the police officer, the person stopped, or other persons present. Ms. Haynes doesn't believe that being forced to the ground, as she says with a knee in her back, and being pulled by her collar to witnesses, was reasonably necessary to protect the parties. Also, the reasonableness of the stop, we know that the CRC summary states that it will not be investigating that. It was declined for investigation by IPR, and as Mr. Yarrow stated, the CRC is limited to reviewing only those claims which were accepted for investigation by the chain of command, and accordingly, CRC will not be addressing any of the appellant's other claims, the unnecessary stop, for instance, which were declined for investigation by the chain of command. So as a result, directives involving prohibited discrimination and bias-based policing are essentially out of CRC's scope. As a practice, the appellant and the NLG Portland chapter believes is a real issue. CRC's mission is to improve police accountability and promote higher standards of police services and to increase public confidence. And if any topic currently stands at the center of community concern, it's racially based policing. In fact, in CRC's own 2010 disparate treatment complaint report, the CRC indicated that the credibility of both CRC and IPR would be enhanced if CRC and its work groups engaged in more regular routine auditing of IPR case files, office policies and procedures, and case handling decisions. For instance, last year there were 34 allegations of disparate treatment that were received, and only 2 were investigated, and both of those 2 were exonerated. In a November 2010 memorandum signed by Levon Griffin Vidal Velade, it was agreed that investigations conducted by IPR or IAD and reviews by CRC should proceed in a manner that's consistently and objectively independent. If the CRC is unable to consider the circumstances that predicated a contested encounter, the stop itself, how else can CRC evaluate compliance with directives on racial-based policing? It just seems out of the reach of appellants. If IPR can choose to unilaterally not investigate a certain matter, then it's just totally not in the reach of appellants, and that was concerning to her. Especially on an issue that she feels is the most egregious aspect of this case, which is the fact that she was stopped for a Hispanic male who, there was actually one of Ms. Haynes' friends, Nancy Henderson of the Bureau of Emergency Communications, who provided her a transcript of the initial call, one of the initial calls about the mailbox suspect, said that there was actually a slender Hispanic male slouched over walking slowly through a neighborhood. And she feels that it would probably help if she was here, then you could see her physical person, and that's what she feels was the most egregious part of this case. So she really urges the CRC to reconsider not choosing to investigate those issues that aren't taken by IPR. Another issue that she had was regarding the search and whether she was being detained or not. There's different testimony about whether she was told if she was being detained or not, and she feels that this is very pertinent to the reasonableness of the search. She states that she asked the officers, "Are you detaining me?" and they didn't give her an answer. And so when she went to grab her bag, that was the reason in the CRC summary that the officers then restrained her. But we feel as though if she wasn't being detained, and if she was never told she was being detained, and the IA findings do not comment on this, if she was actually told that she was being detained as a finding, that it would bear on the fact that she went to grab her bag. If she was told that she wasn't being detained, we don't think it would be unreasonable for her to grab her bag, and that shouldn't serve as a predicate for them to restrain her. So that was one of the issues that she felt should have had a conclusion, either by IPR or IA in their findings. There was also some discrepancies between the reason why she was searched. Officers stated in the summary that she was searched incident to arrest, but in the IA findings, it stated that she was searched because of officer safety and they feared that she was grabbing. When she went to go reach down for her bag to leave, that she was reaching for a weapon. And I think that what also should be taken into account was the fact that if she was on her cell phone reportedly, and she had a coffee mug in her hand because the coffee spilled everywhere when they went to grab her. I think that thinking about the reasonableness of whether she was going to grab a weapon in the bag is something that CRC should consider. Let's see. The final thing that she was going to talk about in her testimony was that during the show-up, or subsequent to the search, after they had searched her bag, they didn't find any mail, they started going through her wallet to find her ID. When the show-up occurred and the witnesses were presented, not only was she forcefully shown to them, she states that she was grabbed by her shoulder and pushed over to them while she was in handcuffs. She states that the officers also showed the witnesses her ID from her wallet, and she thinks that that was exceeded bureau policy because it had her personal information on it, and if the witnesses had saw her from afar in the first place, there's no reason why they would need to see her ID as well. The final issue that she had was with courtesy, and she thinks that this was violated in a number of ways. Obviously, the profanity that she states happened to her. In her testimony, she was going to recollect the fact that when the encounter was first beginning to happen and the officer said, "You have no effing rights," that actually a person in the Wells Fargo, a banker at the Wells Fargo was walking in, one of the customers, and he's like, "Yeah, you don't have no effing rights." So that really affected her emotionally because she never thought that an officer would be, his actions and comments toward her would influence someone in the own current community to make those statements to her, and they did in her words. In addition, after they looked into her wallet, she states that they made comments about how much money she had in her wallet. I believe they were commenting on how she had $11 or $14 in her wallet at that time, and she feels that that was really discourteous and hurtful. And also the photos, I didn't know where to put that underneath retaliatory or courtesy. She felt that the issue with the photos on the cell phone was a really dehumanizing experience. It was humiliating, and it made her feel like a criminal. And I think that courtesy is really important because a number of other policies, directives fall under it. The mission and goals of the Portland Police Bureau: integrity, respect, compassion, excellence. Human goals, another police directive, that the Bureau must always be guided by the principle that the individual has infinite dignity and worth, and we must show respect for the citizens we serve. And another directive, community policing purpose, which is to strengthen the partnerships among citizens and police to reduce fear and be sensitive to cultural and ethnic diversities in the areas that they serve. Those were all of the investigative recommendations we had. I kind of had more of a additional housekeeping sort of recommendation for the CRC when I was looking online to try to find where this hearing was a few weeks ago. I was having trouble finding exactly which room and where these CRC meetings were being held. So maybe if you made that more accessible on your website, I think that would be really helpful to the community. And that is it for now. I hope Ms. Haynes shows up. Thank you.
Thank you. We do not have a respondent officer or representative here this evening. At least that is my belief. Does anyone disagree with that? Okay. So I'm going to ask Lieutenant Bell to outline the investigation for us, please.
Certainly. This was investigated by investigator Lynn Courtney. In this case, there was only a single report written on the incident by the officer, so he reviewed the report. He also conducted a follow-up interview with Mrs. Haynes to get additional detail from her, to fill in the blanks from her initial intake interview with IPR. After he did that, because this occurred in front of an ATM, he actually contacted Wells Fargo, tried to see if he could locate any surveillance footage that would kind of be an unbiased witness and kind of tell a little better what was going on. He was unable to track down either any additional witnesses or any surveillance footage. I believe in terms of the camera on the ATM, it was past the time when those images were still being held on their system. And then he interviewed the two officers individually on this case, and then wrote up his summary report.
And do you know, Lieutenant Bowes, whether or not the appellant asked for anyone else to be interviewed or had other suggestions for people to be interviewed?
No, there were, neither the officers nor the appellant gave the investigator any information on any additional witnesses that may be interviewed. So I believe because of where it occurred, there were many witnesses. However, they were just passerbys and nobody that the officers or the appellant were able to identify.
Can I ask a question? Ms. Haynes was on the phone at the time with her son, I believe. So he was an ear witness, but was not interviewed. Was there a reason?
Actually, I was just looking through here because I had the same question. I'm not sure why he wasn't interviewed, but it does not appear that he was interviewed.
Okay. Lieutenant Elmore, could you please explain the command staff findings going through the allegations that were brought forth by the appellant and your review of them, the information you relied upon, and your reasoning coming to the decision that was made?
All right, again, Lieutenant Elmore, I've been in the Port Police Bureau for 23 years. In looking at this case, Mrs. Haynes, at 10 o'clock in the morning, was on her way to report for community ordered court service. Witnesses saw a Hispanic male described going through mailboxes in that location. Our officers were dispatched at a priority 3, which would go 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1 to 7. They dispatched to that location. Even by Mrs. Haynes' own account, she said that she fit the description that was given. In reviewing this information and also talking to the officers, when they first made contact with Ms. Haynes, she was screaming and asking for the police when all the police were there in uniform and in police cars. They made contact with her. She was very uncooperative at that point in time. At that point in time, with reasonable suspicion and probable cause, they took a look into her backpack after she tried to grab that backpack. At that point in time, the officers put her in handcuffs. There's nothing that says that Mrs. Haynes was taken to the ground. In fact, the IPR reports by her own account, Haynes states that during the IPR investigation, I was tussling with them because they touched me. They put me in handcuffs, and I was fighting with them. Haynes reports that she was thrown to the ground and physically injured during the arrest. There's no evidence of that. Also, Mrs. Haynes reported to the emergency room after this and said that she had physical injuries and x-rays. When she was at the emergency room, the only thing she was treated for was a common cold. When determining a member's use of force, we resolve confrontation effectively to the totality of the circumstances and de-escalation of those situations. And I feel that the officers did that during the situation, showing her uncooperative attitude during the whole encounter and bringing attention to herself and trying to bring attention to everyone that was around her bringing alarm to them. The investigation as looking at it, the officers followed Directive 10-10-20 and the amount of force necessary for the situations. Mrs. Haynes had no intentions of cooperating with the officers, and her behavior only escalated as the situation evolved. In an investigative file, an example of Haynes' past behavior case in 2011, Haynes was contacted by the Portland Police transit officers near a transit center. Mrs. Haynes was combative, screaming, attempted to kick the windows out of the police car, and called the police officers Satan. So, with that information and everything that I gleaned from this, it was exonerated on use of force 1010 was appropriate. As far as the allegations 3 and 4 for officers A and B, also Baldwin conducted a proper search. This officer Winkle also. In finding this information and looking at the search was incident to arrest, and the officer would attempt to find evidence of information concerning the commission of a criminal offense. Mrs. Haynes, as I said earlier, had no intentions of being searched or talking to the officers at that point in time. We had no way of getting any positive identification of Mrs. Haynes. She was primarily upset because she felt that her constitutional rights were violated. And in some ways I can understand that. But she was not cooperative anyway. She did things, further movements that officer safety, myself and others would see as a constitution to actually move a backpack or take her into custody or control her hands, because hands are the things that can hurt us at all times in our line of work. As far as a female officer being on scene, we had a female officer, Officer Ripley was on scene, but conducting other parts of the investigation. And the officers did a pat down. They did not do an intrusive search, which you would use with the back of your hand as you touch, looking for bulges, weapons, knives, and hopefully not needles that stick us all the time. The investigation clearly shows Officer Baldwin utilized the information related to this case and is within policy. As far as allegation 5, Officer Baldwin rude, exonerated. There's no information that I gleaned from this report that tells me that Officer Baldwin used profanity at any time during the confrontation. Mrs. Haynes was very verbal, louder than everyone else, no doubt, and he tried to calm her down. And none of the things of his, he's been around over 20 years, none of the things that he could utilize at that point in time would calm her down. And as he said, well, I said something off the wall, and I don't recall it, but it wasn't fucking right. I don't believe, and he said, I don't believe I recall saying that. And that's from his transcript, 297 to 204 of the interview. First of all, officers should, at any time, make sure that people understand why we're talking to them. And you would try and wait until someone calms down, but at no time did she calm down during this, any time during this incident. And so we exonerated on the aspect of rudeness by Officer Baldwin.
Thank you. Mr. Severe, any comments on the case?
No. We have any questions?
I'm sorry?
We ask questions?
Absolutely.
Okay. Lieutenant Elmore, I have a couple of questions for you. In your finding, you discuss a lot about the search of the appellate's body. You don't mention at all the search of her backpack?
Yes.
Okay. Now, in reading the officer's statements, they say that search was incident to arrest, so I was wondering what exact crime she was under arrest for that led them to...
Well, taking mail is a crime. And
right.
According to what type of mail, if it was mail of checks,
right.
It would be mail, and that would be the amount.
Right.
Or it would be, or mail was taken for fraudulent reasons also.
So she was under arrest for the mail theft?
Well, at that point in time, I feel that the officers had reasonable suspicion to talk to her.
Yes.
She was uncooperative. When she reached for the backpack,
right.
They took her into custody. But yes, they were investigating that crime. Officer safety was a most important point at that point in time. And it was search instance to arrest. That is correct.
Okay, and the crime was?
Well, the crime of disorderly conduct at that point in time, as they saw it, because she was uncooperative, screaming, loud.
Okay, I also remember seeing in the report that they arrested her for interfering with a police officer, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's interfering with IPO, interfering with police officer, when you're trying to investigate a crime or an investigative environment. If someone keeps you from doing your job, going forward with that, it is
Right.
individual police officer.
Okay, I believe the exact terminology in the law is refusing a lawful order with police officers. Okay, I'll continue with this line later, but I'm just playing with some questions. Okay.
Okay. So, Mr. Severe, no comments on the case?
I mean, just to address some of what the appellant said, when I reviewed this case from the anonymous city employee, I was concerned about the totality of the case. Just reviewing the officer's report, Officer, I believe A's report, I didn't feel there was enough in that particular report to justify what we had heard at IPR. So I felt that it needed a full investigation. The search, stop, and the racial, or the disparate treatment allegation that was part of the complainant's case to us. Upon reviewing the findings done by Lieutenant Elmore, I signed off on those because, as stated in the record, the complainant, or the appellant in this case, admits to IPR that she actually had a physical confrontation with the officers. There's a justification by the officers that their search of the appellant was search incident to arrest, and at least for me, that was one of the issues that I was concerned about when I forwarded the case over. And I think there's a distinction between search incident to arrest as the justification that the officers use as covered by the directives, and versus a defense attorney, or if Ms. Appellant was charged with a crime and she had a motion to suppress or something, and what a court would look at and weigh whether her constitutional rights were violated or not, versus reviewing this case and looking at the justification based on what's in the Bureau directives and the Bureau policies on search incident to arrest, and the justification given by the officers. So upon reviewing that, I signed off on Lieutenant Elmore's findings.
Any comments on the reasons?
I'm hazy on that. Could you explain that search? You're signing off on the search a little more for me. Confused the middle page.
I hardly doubt that. I mean, the officers say that they were going to arrest, or, well, first that there's reasonable suspicion based on the information given by the informants of the police that there was a person rifling through mail, and the officers contact Ms. Haynes. Ms. Haynes is uncooperative. She reaches for the bag. At that point, according to the Bureau, Lieutenant Elmore, there's also probable cause to arrest her for interfering with a peace officer and disorderly conduct, and incident to that, or incident to the arrest. They search her backpack. Now, the distinction is, that's a police officer's distinction. I mean, that hasn't been tested by an Article III court. Right? That's not a judge saying, okay, I agree with that. And for my purposes, I'm not saying whether this is constitutional or not. If I was a defense attorney, I would have filed a motion to suppress and made an argument that this is an unconstitutional search. But in my role as an IPR assistant director and as a fact finder in the context of this particular case, I'm looking at what is the officer's justification. Is this one? Is this something like objectively reasonable within the directive, within what the directive allows? And is this something that the officers really believe at the time of the offense? And looking at Officer A and B's interviews with IA, and given what the appellant stated during her, I mean, this is kind of a little different than a lot of the cases that we get, where officers say X and the appellant says Y. Appellant and the officers, even though they're, it's kind of like that movie Rashomon, where, there's like, you hear everybody's kind of perspectives on the scene,
right,
and then you put it together, you kind of get the flavor, maybe not the whole incident, but you get a pretty good flavor of what actually occurred. And putting those two narratives together, there aren't too many discordant notes. I mean, The appellant's not happy with the contact that she had with officers. She's not happy that she was stopped as a short, squat, and hopefully the appellant will forgive me for describing her as such, squat African-American woman, while the person rifling through the mail was described as a thin Hispanic male. Just reviewing that particular complaint, or that particular allegation, that was one of the reasons why I forwarded the case out, because I actually thought that should have been investigated, and that's why I referred it to IA. And given the context of where we are right now, I believe that particular allegation would be investigated fully. I think that needed to be fully investigated, just to paint a better picture of what actually occurred. Because I think the process is not really fully served when we get these cases where parts of an allegation are investigated and other parts aren't investigated and people have questions about it. So just from an IPR perspective, I would fight pretty vigorously on the disparate treatment allegation being investigated, like looking forward. But kind of back to what we were talking about, there's a distinction between what an officer's justification for his actions and possible constitutionality, possible future 1983 suits, whatever. I mean, those are different things within the context of the officer A and B's interviews with the IA investigators. I found them to be credible. I found Ms. Haynes, the appellant, to be credible in her interview. And so I weighed all of their testimony equally. No one got more of a benefit of a doubt than anybody else. So that's kind of what my mindset was in that. Hopefully I answered your question.
Yes, you did. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Any comments on the rudeness?
No, I think on the rudeness allegation, again, we gotta have an imperfect system. For myself, if I was writing the findings from the scratch, I would have, I think I would have looked at it maybe a little bit differently, but I would have just read it maybe a little bit differently. But just at the end of the day, just based on what's in the record, I felt comfortable with it being exonerated. Just based on what is written down and based on what the officer stated and what Ms. Appellant stated to the interviewers, I thought that was kind of a fair kind of summation of what basically all the information brought forward kind of stated.
And our appellant is joining us. What? Go ahead.
Maybe I'm missing something here, but there was originally a claim considered of racial profiling or disparate treatment.
Disparate treatment.
But it's not here now, correct?
Yeah, so we got the complaint, IPR, when it opened up its initial investigation, we took the complainant's concerns about that particular portion of it. We forwarded it to Internal Affairs for investigation. I always want to make sure I'm absolutely sure on this, but I want to say we referred all 6 allegations over to Internal Affairs for investigation in Internal Affairs, and I believe it was the lieutenant at the time.
It says 7, actually.
Oh, okay. Forwarded all the allegations to Internal Affairs. The lieutenant at the time decided that, based on, well, I won't speak for Internal Affairs, but his justification for why he decided not to open up the disparate treatment claim was within IA's authority. Under the city code, Internal Affairs has the authority to either accept an IPR referral, either refer that as a service improvement opportunity, or decline it.
So that's where it went.
Yeah, it was declined by
Declined by A, was not IPR.
No.
That was the stop allegation.
Well, she was stopped because she was African American.
That is the stop allegation?
Right.
Which was not investigated.
That's the only ones that weren't investigated.
But it wasn't called disparate treatment. That's what I was kind of
No.
getting at.
Because there wasn't a formal, there was never a formal allegation.
Okay. Why wasn't it formal allegation?
So let's give Mr. Severe another bite of that apple. Mr. Severe, I'm looking at the IPR intake summary provided to me. And it lists the disposition of administrative investigation allegations. It has 7 of them. The bottom 2, 6, and 7 have been declined by IA, and neither of those appear to be a disparate treatment.
Okay. I mean, this, and I think we probably should have done a better job of like kind of describing that, but often, allegations 6 and 7 on the intake sheet, that's what I've been calling the disparate treatment because, you know, allegation formation is, you know, it's an art as opposed to science. So you can describe particular course of conduct in several different ways. And in this particular case, the fact that the officer stopped and detained, unnecessarily stopped and detained the complainant, based on what the complainant was telling us, she was stating to us that she felt that she was stopped because she was African American. And based on what the anonymous, well, it's not very anonymous at this point, but the city employee that referred this case to us, that was one of her concerns as well. So that's like kind of, in total of those 2 particular allegations, that's what it was. But the way it was listed was as a unsatisfactory performance, 31550. When you look at the lieutenant's rationale for not going forward with, those particular 2 particular allegations, he kind of states a rationale why he didn't go forward with the investigation, which, I mean, that's a reasonable.
I just want to know where it went.
Oh, sorry, okay, gotcha. I mean, it was a reasonable rationale, but that kind of was what, it was in my thinking, because in my head, that's what I kind of classified it as basically a disparate treatment claim.
Okay, and, Ms. Swift, if you want to take a moment or two to talk to the appellant, to orient her to where we are, we could certainly take a statement from her before we proceed forward, because we're about ready to get into the sort of discussion section and the going over a recitation of the allegations again. So I would like, as I tipped my hat at the beginning, to offer the appellant an opportunity to address us directly. She just got here and I don't want her to be flustered. So if you want to take a moment or two to step out, we could take a brief break to allow you an opportunity.
I'm also gonna have a chance just to address some of the things that were said.
You will have a chance, and when it's going to be is after public comments and a whole discussion from the CRC, then there's public comments. That way you get to hear all of our questions, etc.
Wonderful, thank you.
So how much time would you like?
Probably just about 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay. We'll just take your time.
I just love it. It's versions of life that are black and white, not always, as we're dealing with nuance and shades and parsing. Oh, okay, all right.
Thank you all. We're back from our break. Ms. Swift and the appellant are back with us. I guess I just want to try to clarify before we take a statement. Are we or are we not using your name, ma'am? Because I think when we did a case file review, we used your name, and so people have been using your name. And that is at your discretion to do that. So are you comfortable having your name used or not?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. You're welcome to say no, please call me a comment, we'll do that. Okay. And then as a reminder to everyone, and I'm not picking on Lieutenant Elmore in particular, but we're gonna try to use Officer A and Officer B. And in every appeal that I've been involved in, I have, or Captain Famous has, or someone has blown through this confidentiality rule, so we'll try not to do that. So there we go. Okay, so welcome, ma'am. Thank you for being here this evening. Sorry it took you a while to get here, but we're glad you're here. And we heard from Ms. Swift in your absence about your perspective on this case, but of course this is your appeal and we're here to hear your concerns. So we welcome you now to offer us any comments that you have.
Thank you. At this time, I want to thank everyone that came to support me. I want to thank my CRC members and board members. Good evening to all. I want to take this time to share my story with you. But before I do that, I just want to give a little background on myself. I have lived in Portland for the past 4 years, and since I have moved here, I have been heavily involved in the community movement to curb racial and bias-based police profile. I never thought that I would experience it firsthand. Excuse me. But in the end, I am glad I did, because I can use this experience, which will forever be burned in my mind, as means to inform the community and hopefully help progress police practices that silently occur throughout our community on a daily basis. As I speak to you all today, put yourself as if this was your mother, your daughter, your sister, your wife. On February 17th, 2012, I was on the bus, 72 headed southbound, to 82nd and Foster. I was headed to volunteer at 3 that day. It was around 10 something in the morning. And it was raining that day. And it was on a Friday. I just got off the number 72 bus on Foster and 82nd. I walked across the street to catch another bus that would take me to Freaky. I checked the bus stop number to see how long the bus would be there. It said 8 minutes. Then I proceeded to walk in the parking lot, across the parking lot at the Wells Fargo Bank at the ATM machine to stand out of the rain. I had a tall cup of coffee in my hand. I had my earbuds in my ear and my phone. I was listening to music. So I was just standing there under the shelter, out of the rain, and I noticed there was a police car that made a U-turn in the middle of the street on the corner of 82nd and Foster and pulled right into the parking lot at Wells Fargo Bank that morning. And they got out the car and approached me kind of quickly. Like I said, my bus was due in 8 minutes. So by the time they came to me, was approaching me, the officer Baldwin and Winkle walked up to me. Officer Baldwin, Officer A and B, excuse me, Officers A and B approached me. One was an older gentleman, and one looked like a young rookie cop. And Officer,
The older rookie is Officer A. and
the older rookie Officer
the
A, approached me and asked me where was I coming from, and asked me my name. You know, so basically right then and there, when I seen them approaching me, before they had asked me that, in my mind, I just thought something might have occurred, and maybe they thought I saw something, you know, in the area, you know, that something happened, you know, or, you know, they were just coming up to get money out of the ATM machine or something like that. I wasn't alarmed, you know, at them walking. I just thought it was, you know, strange, you know, but when they did, you know, I tried to engage them, you know, Officer A, older gentleman, like I said, he asked me where I was coming from. He asked me my name. I didn't feel comfortable telling my name because he didn't tell me why he was there. And I felt, you know, like he was, you know, up to something. You know, I said, well, I'm just standing here waiting on my bus, you know, to go to Free Gate. And my bus is coming in 8 minutes and I have to go. I have to volunteer, you know. And it was important that I go volunteer that day because I was dealing with some other issues and I had to go do that. And they were stopping me from, you know, going to do that when they, you know, they walked up to me. And so when I refused to give them information, the officer got upset. And at this point, I was getting nervous. I was wondering, you know, why was he getting upset with me, you know. And I wouldn't, you know, I refused to tell him, and he said, well, I'm gonna get it anyway, you know. So I had a backpack on. This is what I had on. I'm gonna show you an example. That's the exact way I was dressed that day.
It was the same crochet hat.
This one right here. It was cold that day, just like this. This is what I had on that day. And so the officer said that he was going, Officer A said that he was going to get it out of my backpack. Anyway, this is the backpack that I had. I had my wallet in there that day and my lunch and my house keys. That's all I had in there. See, it's black and white. It's not all black. It's black and white. The backpack was standing behind me on the ground because I was checking my bus in to see what time the bus was coming. So, like I said, the officer said that he was going to get my ID, whether I wanted him to or not, you know. And I said, well, you're violating my rights, my constitutional rights. I don't give you permission, you know, to go into my backpack, you know. And if you do, you're violating my constitutional rights. And what did I do wrong? You know, I said, you just came up to me out the blue, just asking me questions, where I'm coming from, what's my name, and, you know, why are you here? He wouldn't tell me why he was here. So, I was exercising my rights by telling Officer A, both of them, basically, that I do not consent to illegal search and seizure. If you're going to look at my backpack, you must have a warrant. You know, I'm not going to give you any information because I feel threatened by you. By then I said, well, I'm going to call my son. And so when I was calling my son, I got my son on the phone. And I said, son, the police are here. I feel threatened. They're threatening to go in my backpack, and they didn't say if I was under arrest or they would detain me, like that. And so he said, well, if they're not detaining you, if you're not under arrest, then they should give you permission to walk away, because I'm coming down there, I'm gonna call, he said he was gonna call 911, and he did do that. He called 911, and he heard all the commotion in the background, as I stated, I told the officers that they didn't have a right to go into my backpack, and they did anyway, since I had told them, if I'm not being detained, and I'm not under arrest, I'm leaving. So I grabbed my backpack and started walking away. So they, basically, when they walked up to me, and they walled me off, like a wall, and I had nowhere to go but around them. When I did that, that's when they both grabbed me and knocked my coffee out of my hand, my phone, like everything, just, went everywhere. My coffee spilled all on them because it was hot, and they were mad about that. I tried to walk away, and they grabbed me, and they both took my arms and took me down on the ground, and I scuffled with them because they were hurting me, If it was you, your mom, you would feel threatened, you would feel scared. All kinds of things was running through my mind. I didn't know what they were going to do to me. They were driving a Dodge Charger at the time. They surrounded me. They threw me in handcuffs and threw me in the cop car without reading my rights or telling me that I'm being detained or under arrest. They did not tell me that. When I was explaining to Officer A and B that I was exercising my rights, he stated to me, shut the F up, you have no effing rights, you effing B, and when there was, what did you say, a passerby walking from the bank, out of the bank to his vehicle in the parking lot, because he walked so close to us. He said it to me, he said, yeah, shut the F up, like he said. That's what someone said. And me thinking like that, what he just said, thinking about what he said, it just made me feel humiliated, vulnerable, scared. My son was at home. I had nobody there to defend me. Look at me. I'm 4'10". I'm a mother of 4. I moved here to Portland, to your town. I'm an activist. I work in the community. Thank you. I work in the community. I volunteer. Never in my wildest dreams did I ever think that this would happen to me. It's hard telling my story over and over again. So think about your mom. Think about your family members. I'm not from here. I came to your town. Flourishing your town with my skills, my service, my time, my volunteer work. I've worked with a lot of these organizations and nonprofit organizations, given my time, my devoted time. And for something like this to happen to me, it's unacceptable. I feel like I was pushed through this process. I wasn't giving a fair process through this. I feel that there's a lot of corrupt things going on in the system here in the city of Portland. I don't look at Portland the same as I did when I first moved here. I don't look at it the same. Now, the citizens of Portland know what's going on. They know how people get pushed through the system so much. I just urge you all today just to listen to my story and make the right decision today. Before I continue, may I ask if my son testified to the point when I called him? Because I did put that in my appeal.
You are entitled to call material witnesses at this appeal hearing if you would like to.
Yeah, so we'd like to call my son, Felix Bordeaux,
Alrighty?
on what he heard.
Okay, and maybe we could scoot the chair next to Mr. Severe over to allow your witness a seat at the table. And ma'am, you're free to ask him questions if you'd like, or if you just want to make a statement to us, whatever you prefer.
Yes, I would like to ask my son to speak on the day that I called him on February 17th, to recall that morning around 10 a.m., after 10 a.m. when he got that call from me. What exactly did he hear?
Okay, first of all, my name is Felix Bordeaux. This is my mother. For the record, my name is Felix Bordeaux. This is my mother. I'm here to testify what I witnessed and heard over the phone. I got a phone call around 10 o'clock on February 17th. My mom said the police had stopped her, and they don't know. She doesn't know why they stopped her, and she says she's afraid and she don't know what to do. I said, Mom, did they read you your rights? Have they said they detained you? Have they told you anything? I said, no. All they want to know is where I'm coming from and see my ID. Well, if they haven't detained you, I said, Mom, get your backpack and walk away because it's illegal for them to stop you for no reason. She did that. Next thing I know, she's like, oh, and she's screaming. The terror, I can't even fathom how much anger I had in my boy and my blood. These officers to put their hands on my mother. She's 4'10". They had no reason to come at her like that. They did a U-turn. But back to my story, what I witnessed and what I heard. I heard coffee get knocked out of her hand. Her phone gets knocked out of her hand. They said, stop struggling, stop fighting, you black bitch. Stop resisting. You have no fucking rights. Next thing I know, I hear somebody say, yeah, you have no fucking rights. Shut the fuck up. Some passerby. Next thing I know, they said, stop struggling, stop struggling. Next thing I know, I hear some anonymous people come and say they got witnesses. And they couldn't really identify her. They couldn't say anything other than she kind of looks like them. But they didn't tell her the age, the race, the height. They didn't say anything. They just know she kind of looks like her. And these anonymous people, I don't know who they were. And from that point, that's when the phone hung up and I had to call 911.
So,
Does the board have any questions for me or any questions about anything? Just while I'm here.
Do you mind if we ask your son some questions before you continue?
That's fine.
Do people have questions for Mr. Bordeaux? Mr. Bordeaux, how long do you estimate you listened?
It was a good 3 to 5 minutes. I heard scuffling, I heard shut the fuck up, you have no rights, stop resisting, stop resisting. You broke my glasses, you bit my glasses, Officer A or B, whoever that was. I heard some officer say you bit my glasses and he was pissed off about it. And you know what I'm saying? And she said, you're hurting me, stop, what did I do? And all I heard was screaming, that's all I heard, her screaming. And then when I said on record what they said, you have no rights, stop resisting, you black bitch, you have no rights. And this is, I'm on the phone listening to this, 3 to 5 minutes, it's just it's hard to even talk about this, man, because we shouldn't even be here.
So could you hear when the phone left your mom's hand and fell onto the sidewalk or the ground?
Yeah, it was still open.
So that didn't disconnect the call, you were still able to hear?
Because I could hear her screaming and rustling with the police.
And, did the phone just remain there while you were listening? Did the phone seem to be moving as you were listening, or did
It was just stationary, you know, it was like they were scuffling right there by the ATM where it happened, and then it just kicked off.
And did you hear your mom being put in a police car?
I didn't hear that. Like I said, after she was forced to be on and handcuffed, I didn't hear anything after that.
Did you, and you heard people coming up to try to identify your mom?
Yes, if somebody's trying to identify her or something, there was somebody on their way or something, so that they could identify her, and that's what the witnesses said, that she kind of looked like her.
So, did you hear that on the police radio, or do you think
Yeah,
you heard somebody say it kind of looks like this?
That's what I heard, whoever the witnesses were.
And how did the phone call end?
And then basically saying, stop struggling, you have no rights, we have somebody on the way that can identify you, and then say, that kind of looks like her. That's all I heard, that kind of looks like her, but it's not.
I must not have asked the question very well. Did you end the phone call, or did the phone on your mom's end
It just
disconnect?
ended completely. I guess the phone call got disconnected.
Okay.
At some point, you called 911,
Yes, ma'am.
and when was that, and how did that go?
Basically after the call got disconnected and they said that she was struggling, I called 911 and the operator said, well, what's going on? Well, my mother was attacked at 82nd and Foster. She didn't do anything. We got to send some more officers to make sure she's on her son at home. She just left home. Well, they said, there was a female operator, she said, well, if she hasn't done anything, she just needs to cooperate. If she hasn't done anything, she just needs to cooperate, and then she hangs up. So it was real brief, basically, if she didn't do nothing wrong, she should cooperate, like it's my mom's fault she's being attacked. So that's basically how it was, no sympathy, it's real brief.
When you found out that your mom was going for an investigation on all of this, did you, had you two talked about what you had overheard on the phone?
No.
Okay.
She filed for something a while back, it took a whole year for them to find out what happened.
Okay.
That's what I heard.
And did you ever want to or try to contact anybody that she was working with on this appeal to tell what you had overheard?
This is the first time I've told anybody, other than when I told the operator. I haven't told anybody, haven't made a police report, haven't filed anything. This is the first time I've even addressed this issue or even told the top about it. It's the first time on record. I'm talking to police officers, haven't filed anything. Only conversation I had was with the 911 operator and what I said today in testimony.
Okay. Are there other questions from Mr. Boyd?
When did you tell her what you had heard?
With the teller, the operator,
No, your mother.
what do you mean?
When did you tell her what you had heard on the phone?
When she had got home.
Oh, you did tell her right then?
Yeah, I said, Mom, I heard the whole conversation. And I told her what I heard. After she had got home, I said, Mom, the phone didn't hang up. I heard what they said. She said she didn't know that.
Well, I guess I'm kind of wondering, ma'am, did you tell IA about what your son had heard?
Did I tell IA?
Yes, did you tell the police when they were, internal affairs, when they were talking to you, did you tell them what your son had heard on the phone?
Yes. Yes, I told half the things.
Do you remember, ma'am, who you were working with from Internal Affairs for this investigation?
I think my first initial contact was Judy Taylor and Captain Amos.
Did you ever work with someone named Lynn Courtney?
Miss Lynn Courtney.
Works underneath Captain Amos at Internal Affairs and did a lot of the investigation on this case.
It's possible, I just remember speaking with Captain Amos.
Okay.
You have another question?
Well, we're waiting. Did the officer at A&D tell you were being arrested for rifling through mailboxes?
No, they didn't bring that up until after I was put into handcuffs and put in the police car after that.
So after you were in handcuffs and put in the police car, then they said, you're under arrest for,
No, they didn't never say I was under arrest.
they never said you were
No,
under
they,
arrest.
after they put me in handcuffs, they put me in the hot car.
Well, how did this mail thing come up? How did they tell you about it?
They told me about it, when I got on the police car. They told me that they had got an anonymous call about somebody rifling through mailboxes, and I fit the description, and I said, well, I asked them, the officers, A and B, I said, well, was it a male or female? What was their ethnicity? What was their height? You know, I asked them all those questions.
So when they handcuffed you, they never said you were under arrest?
No, after they handcuffed me, they never said I was under arrest or I was being detained. They never told me
And
that.
they never read you your rights?
No, they didn't.
Did you have other things that you wanted to tell us? Lynn?
Yes,
I'm sorry, Ms. Pluto. Thank you very much for your time. After I was handcuffed, after they took me to the ground and handcuffed me, and then they both began to search, pat me down, and search me while I was in handcuffs. They, and you can see that, well, they were all in my pockets, they were in my front pockets, my coat was zipped up, I had pockets in the front, they went in my front pockets, I had pockets on the side, they went into them. They searched me underneath my coat, they searched me between my legs, they searched me in all of my pockets. They did all that to me. I felt violated, humiliated, frightened, scared, wishing my son was there, wishing there was the witnesses, they were all around. Just watch, and observe, I was asked while I was being put into handcuffs, I did say to other people that were going in and out of the banks, to observe, to call 911, to take pictures, to record, what was being done to me. There was people driving by in cars, they had cameras, camera phones, videotaping, but no one stood there, stayed there to observe and to watch, make sure that I was okay. I did ask people to watch and observe, so you don't have to get involved, just please watch and observe, make sure that I'm okay. I did say that. So after I was taken
down by the officers and patted and all of that, and humiliated. Put me into the cop car, and I was probably in there maybe 5 to 10 minutes. They had my backpack. My phones and stuff were still like on the ground. I could see my coffee cups were on the ground. And it looked like they were going through my backpack in the trunk. When they finally let me out of the car, Officer B, the young officer, Hispanic officer, I suppose he's Hispanic, he asked me what kind of coffee creamer is that in my coffee because it smelled good, and I could get wasted on all of us. I said, well, I didn't do that to you. You guys snatched me up and put me in handcuffs for no reason. I didn't do anything wrong. And he asked me, where do I buy that good smelling coffee creamer at? What stores do I shop at? Like that. And I said, well, I shop all over. I don't just shop at one store. And so when Officer B grabbed me out of the car, then that's when Officer A was telling me that they had stopped me because there was an anonymous call of someone rifling the mail on 77th and somewhere, I guess, still over there. And I said, well, I just came from northbound. There's no way, that I could be there. I didn't do anything, like that. And I was just scared, appalled, just nervous, afraid. I know I didn't do anything wrong. The officer said that there were witnesses coming that saw me do it. I said, what did they say that so-called witness looked like? And they said, like you. I said, well, how can I be, coming from that direction when y'all saw me come from another direction? They even told me, throughout all of this, between them putting me in handcuffs, in the cop car, and after that, that's when they were telling me that it was an anonymous call, that there was 2 witnesses that saw me. And I'm just trying to figure out, at the time, it's like, well, they couldn't tell me if it was a male or female. Officers did not tell me that it was a male or female. They just said someone, and they said me. And they still wouldn't tell me, if it was a male or female. They just said, they fit my description. I said, well, what does my description fit like? That could be anybody, it could be anybody, And he never did. He never did state that. And I questioned them. I did question them, and they still couldn't give me a direct answer. So the witnesses came, and I'm just nervous. I'm scared because I'm supposed to be heading to Free Geek volunteering. And I'm like, what just happened to me? What just happened? At 10 o'clock in the morning, someone wrapping through mail. Does the mail even run at 10 o'clock in the morning? what did the person look like? Well, they look like you. That's what the officer said. So the two witnesses came, and they were both real tall, Caucasian men. And one of them did look familiar, you know, and to me, I just believe that they were cops. You know, that's just my personal feelings on this. You know, I feel that they were undercover cops, you know, and one of them looked familiar, you know. And why I say that is because I've had dealings with police brutality in the past, you know, that I'm still dealing with right now. And that's why I would like to see those witnesses. I would like to know who their names are. I would like to know who they are. And I still remember what they look like. And so when they came, I heard the Officer A say, one's coming now, and the other one will be coming here soon. So one pulls up in the truck, the other one hides his vehicle on the other side of the building. And they just stood there, the officer and both officers had my hood was still on my head. So basically what they did was they grabbed me up like this in front of the two witnesses, like, I'm a criminal. Where am I going? I'm in handcuffs. You know, they just had me up by the collar like this in front of them, you know. And then that was humiliating to me still. After they just searched me, you know, and violated me and groped me. And then I gotta stand up in front of two witnesses of who I've never seen before in my life, and you feel like I was put on trial for something and that I know I didn't do, and it was just a nightmare to me. They even showed the two witnesses, he already had my wallet, and then also he said that she has money in her wallet. She has $10. They even stated the amount of how much I had in my wallet. They showed the officers my ID. Why would you show someone, a stranger, my ID? If I found the person that did this, why would you show them my ID? I couldn't figure that one out, and I still haven't figured that one out. So they couldn't identify me. So I told the officers, they left, and they talked together, so that's why I feel that they know those witnesses, whoever they are, and something, that's why I said I think they're cops, because they were talking to them, you know, and kind of like engaging them, you know, like they knew each other, you know. And that one, that just still rings in my mind to this day, to this very minute right now, why would they show them my ID? They eventually left, because they couldn't identify me. There was no mail in my backpack, you know. So I asked the officers, he said they was letting me go. I asked the officers for their names. He said, well, our names is on our badge. I said, well, I would like business, I would like your cards, and I would like a police report and a number on this, because I'm going to be pursuing a complaint about you guys, you know, about how you handle me, you know, and how you violated me, and violated my rights, and humiliated me, and terrified me. And the officer said that I was pissing him off, you know, that I keep pissing him off, and he was getting really pissed, and he said, if you pursue this, he threatened me, He said, if you pursue this, we're gonna haul your ass, black ass down to jail right now. If you pursue this, don't piss me off. You bit my glasses, you got coffee all over us, you know. I said, you guys were the one that knocked that, all of that stuff out of my hands. I didn't do anything wrong. You violated me, you know. I didn't give you permission to go in my backpack. You did this to me, you did that to me, you know, and, they were just being very verbal to me, telling me I better not, you're pissing me off, you better not, pursue this. And, I was really scared because they had me halfway in handcuffs, you know, after they said that they was gonna let me go. You know, so I said, well, you said you were gonna let me go. I didn't do anything wrong. You have, you know, nothing to prove that I did anything, you know. And why won't you let me go? I said, well, until you say you're not gonna pursue this, you know, we're gonna take you down there, you know, and you better not pursue this. So, what I'm asking to CRC board members is to take in consideration all the factors in my case. Everyone knows what happened in my case. You heard my story here today about how I explained what happened to me. There's a lot of citizens of Portland in the community that have, there's several organizations in the community that I have worked with since I moved here. I've been in all the prayer vigils for all the victims here at the hands of the police officers. Done a lot of things here in Portland, in your city, to help the community grow and to find a solution to change policies and to hopefully change not only the policies, but police officers' way of thinking before they approach citizens. They need to be fired. The two officers that did this to me, yes, they need to be fired. I want something done so this won't happen to anyone else. Just being here today was very hard for me to tell my story, but I'm not just the appellant. I am a mother, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm a community member, activist, volunteer. Like I said, I worked with a lot of the organizations here in Portland and volunteering with a lot of the churches. I do a lot of community things here in Portland. And I've been a nurse for 20 years. I'm retired now. I also have sustained medical injuries from what the officers have done to me. And you should have copies of that. I'm still, my primary physician is still running tests on me because there's still more things wrong with me. And also, in my first hearing review, I didn't even know that there was a Hispanic male that was rifling through mailboxes until my review. I didn't get copies of this, copies of that. I didn't know a lot of things, you know. So I just feel like I wasn't getting my rights as an appellant, excuse me, that I wasn't getting the necessary paperwork and the process of my whole hearing process. I was only given a week before my hearing review. I was rushed into my hearing review to have this hearing review that I had back in March. I just feel that the officers, A and B, got exonerated and got debriefed on all of this. I do want to move forward with this. I am seeking that you all do the right thing today, and that this doesn't happen from this day forward, that this doesn't happen to anyone else. It is so crucial that we look at new policies or changing new policies and getting the community involved, because these officers are out here doing this to people like myself and other citizens in the community. And we have to start somewhere, and why not today? So I just want to thank you for hearing my story. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. I have one clarifying question. Well, we're gonna do a whole round of questions for everyone, so I'm gonna try to keep the appeal moving along. So, we are going to recite the allegations and findings and options available to CRC for ground secrecy on what we're going to discuss and look into. So, allegation number 1 is that Officer A used unnecessary force. The Police Bureau finding on that was exonerated. The CRC has the option of affirming that finding, challenging that finding, and if challenging, stating whether or not we're challenging it to be sustained or unproven. Or we could request additional investigation. Those 3 options to affirm, to challenge, or to request additional investigation are available to us on each of these. Officer A, speaking the same officer, is also alleged to have conducted an improper search. That was exonerated with the debriefing. And Officer A was alleged to have been rude. That was exonerated. Officer B, who is the younger rookie officer, was alleged to have used unnecessary force. That was exonerated according to the police. And Officer B was alleged to have conducted an improper search of the appellant, which was found to be exonerated with debriefing. So those are the allegations before us. The CRC now has an opportunity to do questions and discussion. So I know that Josh has some questions that he wanted to ask, and I'll start with him.
Thank you very much for being here. I have just one clarifying question. Did you say that the search by the police officers happened before or after you were put in handcuffs?
The search happened before I was put in handcuffs.
person?
Oh, my person, that was after. It was
You were
after.
handcuffed.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So, Lieutenant Elmore, a couple of questions. One is, if, I guess I'm always puzzled as to when police officers kind of communicate information to somebody they're talking to. And, if I was standing and waiting for a bus and a police officer would come up to me, I guess I'd have an expectation, like, look, we need to talk to you, and you can't go anywhere, or, is it, I do this a little bit, so I know sort of the term of your conversation and that sort of thing. And so, how's a person supposed to know the difference?
Well, the question between mere conversation and intention is under mere conversation, you can leave.
Right.
But during this contact, it was very apparent that the officer made her aware that they couldn't leave because they were in an investigative mode. And so they made her aware of that, and she could not leave. And the difference is mere conversation, you have a chance, you can leave. If it's a detention or you're in the investigative mode of this process, you cannot leave. And you would want an officer to tell you that, but also you want to tell them why you are making contact with them also.
And so, would it have been appropriate or not appropriate for the officers to say, look, we've had a complaint, we need to talk to you, about that, or what? So it's obvious they didn't want her to leave. So, putting myself in the appellant's, situation, I probably would have figured that out pretty quickly. At what point do they tell me, we are doing an investigation? And because I'm a little unclear as to, what information was communicated.
Well, that could be a two-pronged approach, because you can make them aware of the situation and tell them why, or you cannot tell them because you have additional things that you want to find out as information is coming in. Because if you tell someone, if I tell you what I'm looking for you for, or what we investigated, you can say, well, I didn't do that. I wasn't there. I wasn't at this location. I came from here. There are many diverse environments in which individuals can change the environment of what the picture is. And what we're trying to do is through information, through radio, through officers investigating, talking to witnesses, we're trying to ascertain all of the information during that process.
Let me talk a little bit about the search. In your finding memos, you had said that a couple of things. One is based on this investigation, the search is probably a pat-down. And that's in the second paragraph.
Yes, I see it.
And did that still, in the description here, sort of still sound like a pat-down? And I guess my question is why I asked a clarifying question, if the appellant was already handcuffed, is the issue of officer safety sort of taken care of at that point?
No. I've had individuals that have been handcuffed that have kicked me in my stomach. Hit me with their knee in my face as I went down to try to check to see if they had any weapons in their pocket. Because just being handcuffed doesn't mean that there's any safety environments for us at that point in time.
And so as I kind of look at pat-down, which I equate with frisk in the directive, and then search is when a person's privacy interests are invaded, unaided observation from a lawful vantage point is not a search in Oregon. Is that still, would we still call it a pat-down, or was it a frisk or was it a search, I guess, under the policy?
I would think that when I say a pat-down frisk, they're looking at this point in time, not for safe or evidence, but also safety would be the back of a hand to check for bulges in pockets and so on. And if you have on a long coat, yes, you would pull up that coat and push your hands on the pockets, all of them, and so forth.
but would you necessarily go into the pocket? Or you would if you felt something?
If you felt something, yes, you would. And when I worked, I'd ask what it is. And you have no consideration that people will always tell you the truth.
And I guess I also kind of focused in the same allegation, same page with the bottom 3 lines of the last paragraph of the officer should have taken the opportunity to use the female officer that was on the scene to search Ms. Haynes. And so I guess my question is, in looking at the policy, I think it's member responsibilities 650.00 and sub, B. Generally searches and inventories of a detainee may be conducted by a member of the opposite gender from that detainee when safety and other tactical considerations permit. In the judgment of the members at the scene, the Bureau recommends that a member of the same gender as detainee conduct a search.
Yes, sir.
So, were you saying that? So I'm trying to sort of align what you sort of wrote with your finding. It's like, since the female officer was on the scene, and she should have taken, so they could have taken the opportunity, and here you said should have taken the opportunity to use the female officer to search the appellant. At what point, is the policy then not violated?
No, the policy is not violated because it said recommends. And it's all the totality of the circumstances. If that officer is doing something else related to this environment, I'm not going to take them away from that part of the investigation to do a pat down, because we trust our personnel to be fair and considerate of the other sex. And the key for me is you trust them to do the right thing. And within that pat down environment, which I've done many of them, that's why you do with the back of your hand. And you're very careful about keeping that hand strong, and so that you don't do anything that would make someone feel that they're groping on any of those environments.
You know what the female officer was doing at the scene at the time?
I wasn't at the scene, so I'm not sure what they were doing. I would think that the officer would be considerate enough of the female officer would have volunteered it if they were within the vicinity of what was going on.
Excuse me. Let's clear this issue up because I'm confused. Because when we did our case file review, I wrote a question. I think Lieutenant Bell can shed some light on this whole thing if you would like. It struck me that when I read through the file, well, why wasn't the female officer at least interviewed if she was on the scene? And I asked that question, and Lieutenant Bell talked about that at our case file review. Would you share that with us all now?
Sure, and actually, I don't believe that was me at the time. That probably would have been Lieutenant Graham, but I do have the material here. And the question you asked, was Officer Rippey interviewed about the incident, and did she observe anything relative to the pat-down? And in this case, she was actually not present during the search. She arrived with the witnesses or witness, I'm still not sure, to do the show up with the appellant. So she was not actually present when they did that initial search. She was shortly thereafter.
And one other question based on the last allegation of Officer A being rude. As I read, both from the material and then what you included in your finding memo, the Officer B's response to the question of whether or not any sort of rude comments, about her rights or anything else was made, and the response was no, absolutely not, no. But the Officer A's response was, well, I said something off the wall to her, and I don't recall what it is. It wasn't what she said, I don't believe, I don't recall. And so, does that, I guess I'm trying to align your thinking too in terms of the difference between what the appellant was saying, an officer saying no, absolutely not, and the third officer saying, well, I said something off the wall to her, I'm not, I don't believe, I don't recall. And so, where do you sort of line up in terms of exonerating on that?
Well, without any information relative to someone saying that that individual said these words, I don't have any information to corroborate that that was said. There are also other statements being said about the word be, the bitch, all those kind of things, that was not included in anything. So we have additional information being given that was not a part of this packet at all.
Yeah, and I'm not asking about that, I'm just kind of going with, you quoted, and said something off the wall, and I don't recall what it is. It wasn't what she said, I don't believe, I don't recall.
And he said he didn't recall.
Can I follow up? I want to follow up on two of the questions that Mr. Bissonnette asked. First one is, because I'm confused also, about how is a citizen supposed to know when a police officer approaches them, what exactly is going on? Like, my understanding in this situation is the officer, first words to Ms. Haynes were, where are you going? And then asked something about, for her ID, but didn't say, we're doing an investigation. So if that's the case, how is the citizen supposed to know that's not just mere conversation and that you can walk away? Because the police officer comes up and says, where are you going, or where you been? How do you know it's just not regular conversation?
Well, in this case, the officer was cordial and polite. He walked you through in contact, as I would make with you. He explained some environments. The individual was uncooperative from the beginning of the contact. Ms. Haynes was uncooperative from my report, very uncooperative.
Yeah.
So it's not like you're giving me information. I'm trying to get information. I'm not getting it at that point in time. As the investigation continued, I get more information. And we're past mere conversation at that point in time when he asked for her identification.
But how are the citizens supposed to know there's an investigation? I mean, if an officer approaches me and asks me a question, am I obligated to answer that question? And if I don't, I'm not being cooperative, and therefore I'm potentially could be under arrest for not cooperating? Is that what you're saying?
Ms. Silver, if you didn't do anything, you wouldn't be under arrest.
No, I'm talking about the cooperation, the approach. I'm not talking
The approach is
whether I
this.
did anything else wrong.
The approach is very simplistic. If I approach you, I would tell you that, ma'am, I need to talk to you about the situation, if I can give you that additional information.
Okay, but you're saying sometimes you can't.
But sometimes I can. But I would ask you for your ID, and would you give me your identification? Most people that I come into contact have no problem with that. They give me their ID, we talk to them, and it's done.
Okay.
A lot of people go, well, I don't have any ID, and I'm not giving you my ID. At that point in time, I ask for your ID. We're past mere conversation at that point in time.
Well, how would a person know that? I mean, you come up to me and you said,
Well, you
where are you
know what-
going, and can I have your ID? And I would say, what do you want it for?
That's correct.
And-
And then I could tell you at that point in time why I'm continuing that
Okay, and you
investigation.
would tell me, well, there's somebody been rifling through
Well, there's
mailboxes?
someone been rifling through, there was a burglary over
Okay,
here.
but this
There was this. and so
person
forth.
wasn't told that. So how did she know she couldn't just pick up her bag and walk away? And her son, she has her son on the phone, and he's saying, you know, they didn't say they were detaining you, they didn't say they were arresting you, so pick up your bag, Mom, and get out of there.
Well, Rochelle, respectfully, I think there's a disagreement.
Yes.
What?
There's a disagreement about what the appellant was told.
Okay.
Officer A indicates that upon contacting her and not getting cooperation, that he then explained there was an investigation and she was not free to go.
Okay, but the beginning part.
Which would be detaining her.
Detaining.
If I tell
Starting
you
with
there's
the
an
cooperation.
investigation
Yeah,
and you
that's-
are not free to go. Now, the appellant very clearly indicates that's not what occurred. So that's what I'm saying, there's a disagreement in the the testimony or the stories that we have from the officers and the appellant. Because I thought the way you were asking the question indicated that the officer never indicated.
No, not never, but at the beginning.
I think he said at the beginning.
Yes.
That he did that. Now, I will tell you, it was a small detail when I was reading the investigation that was very long, and it wasn't until I went back to Steve and had to create the case summary that we started digging for those details, and it stood out to me more. It did not when I initially read it. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but.
No, that's all right. Now, I've forgotten my second question, but it will come back to me and I'll ask you whenever you want to.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question.
Go.
So, the thing that seems to bother me the most in this case is that the appellant, whoever they were looking for, they had a description of the person they were looking for. When they approached the appellant and began to talk to her, they knew right away it was quite unlikely it's the person that was described to them.
Right.
But they nevertheless went ahead and treated her as if she was the person they were looking for. What do you make of that?
Say that to me again,
As soon as they met her, as soon as they talked to her, they knew she was not a 5'5", slender Hispanic man.
Right.
Nevertheless, they went ahead and treated her as if she was that 5'5", slender Hispanic man.
I could chronicle and get you the numbers on how many times misidentifications are done. In fact, I've had situations where I have been walking with the individual that committed the crime. They're telling me that the crime was committed by them. And I've had the witness standing, as far as from me to Ms. Reese over there, saying that's not the person.
I know, but you're being a little too defensive here.
No, I'm not
What
being
I'm trying
defensive,
to
give
get
an
at is-
explanation. I'm telling you.
Yes, it could be anybody. But
Yes.
you're at a bus stop, multiple blocks away, there's a woman standing there by an ATM, and they select her and say she's the one.
Correct.
And it could have been one of 10 people waiting for the bus or going into Wells Fargo, we don't know. But the point is, she did not fit the description.
Well,
So once they knew that, why didn't they back off?
by her own account, she said she fit the descriptions in our report.
Well, she doesn't fit the description.
Well, maybe I can weigh in. I think the answer is twofold. I think first, Lieutenant Elmore's alluding to the fact it could be the witness's description is off, and then it was.
That is possible.
But then in her own interview with Internal Affairs, the complainant said that during the show-up, when the witnesses came for the show-up to see if it was her, then this is the complainant's own words. The witnesses said, "Oh, it looks like her."
Right, I understand that, but that is not when they did the search. That is not when they did the stop. That is later. I'm just wondering, when they first approached her, why did they treat her as if she was the person they were looking for?
Because they were continuing the investigation.
But why her? Because they're looking for a Hispanic male who's 5'6" and slender. They approach Miss Haynes, who clearly is not 5'6". And then when they start talking to her, they realize, well, she's a woman, not a man. She doesn't have a black backpack. She has a black and white backpack with flowers all over it, which probably, well, I won't get into that. But anyway, that she isn't the person. So why didn't they say, "Thank you, ma'am, have a nice day," and go on their way?
Because in many cases, descriptions are not correct, and people don't get them correct. And we find the individual through investigation.
But why her? Why didn't they ask, Joe Citizen next to her, who was a male?
Well, by her own account, as I said before, she even said, they said it looks like her, and she even said that she fit the description. And that's always go by the description.
Lieutenant Bell, was there a question to IA at the case file review about why the son who was on the phone wasn't interviewed?
I went through here, and I did not find that question.
But I thought, and I was wondering the same thing, as I recall when investigator Courtney was here, that question was brought up and it was addressed, and I think we find it in the minutes there, but I don't recall exactly what investigators Courtney said at the case file.
My recollection is, I think I might have asked him why he didn't interview the son. And the answer was, well, he was just on the phone, he wasn't there at the state. I think that's about as much as we talked about.
And it strikes me that there's new information available to the committee that wasn't available to the decision makers at the Bureau in terms of at least the rudeness allegation. When it comes to, as I understand Lieutenant Elmore's reasoning there, we had the appellant stating no effing rights. Officer B, absolutely not me. Officer A said something off the wall, but nothing like that. And so, in weighing, it's not that you didn't have any information, you had a clear statement from the appellant that this statement was made, but that you had clear denials from the officers who apparently found to be more credible. And I'm wondering if there's additional information from an independent, well, not independent, arguably a biased witness because he's the appellant's son, but that substantiates this statement, whether or not that's relevant to the decision maker on that particular allegation. I say that not to force the issue, but simply I'm curious because I would assume the Bureau would want to make sure they have all of the information before the decision maker and looking into an allegation of any police misconduct or alleged police misconduct, including rudeness, then there appears to be today available to us information about a second person hearing that and a further statement referring to the appellant's race and a derogatory term for female.
And also, if I might, address part of that issue now, for the record here this evening, I was quite surprised to hear the IPR director talk about internal affairs declining the disparate treatment allegation. That obviously wasn't the case. We declined unprofessional conduct. The independent police review has at least 4 opportunities to review a case. They accept the case. They complete their own intake investigation. That's sent to internal affairs. We do our investigation. They review that. They have the authority to send it back for additional information at that time, investigation. And they also weigh in on final. So I also have high expectations from my supervisors and command staff that if an allegation regarding disparate treatment is brought out in an investigation, it's certainly brought to my attention. And so it's the first time tonight that I'm hearing that allegation. I understand your need for and your concerns about additional investigation, but I just want to make it clear that I was concerned about those comments. I guess I was surprised.
Okay, thank you for bringing that up, but responding to the issue that I brought to the table, it does appear that there is new information that was not available in the investigation. And is that something that Internal Affairs wants to look into?
So, since we revisited this issue before, as far as protocols and asking for additional investigation, certainly, that's a question you're presenting to Internal Affairs. And I would also believe that question should be addressed to IPR as well, because I'm certainly willing to consider that request. Are you asking for an answer this evening?
No, we're miscommunicating. I am not saying that I'm putting up for a vote, referring this back for additional investigation. We've done that before. I'm simply observing that when you investigated the case, or your people investigated this case, a decision was made that they wouldn't interview the son because he was on the phone, probably wouldn't, he wasn't there to have serve as an eyewitness to any physical struggle that went on. I get that. That's logical to me. I can understand not wanting to deciding not to interview him based upon he wasn't there. But there is an allegation that was referred to you that was investigated on rudeness. The rudeness complaint had to do with using a profanity, which clearly violates bureau policy unless it's necessary in the circumstances and officer threat, blah, blah, blah. And now there's available to us today additional information that a second person heard profanity used against the appellant. Does IPR or IA want to take the opportunity to investigate that further? I'm not saying that we're requesting that. We may be, but I'm curious as to whether or not you and your division or IPR would like to follow up on that now that the information not previously available to you has been brought forward by the appellant in the appeal from her material witness that she's allowed to bring in. And maybe I don't need to answer that right now. I just want to start the wheels turning on.
Well, then don't we have a related question about the dropped count of disparate treatment? We now have information to corroborate that as well, and that has been declined.
Well, I think that Captain Fame was saying it wasn't disparate treatment, it was.
I find no information in the record where General Affairs declined disparate treatment.
So he said they didn't decline it. The question is that it was declined by IPR?
No. The allegation that I was discussing was unnecessarily stopped and detained complainant. The complainant's allegations, IPR, was that one, she didn't match this Hispanic person, and the officers were stopping her as a black person, and part of it was due to her race. And I misspoke when I said it was labeled as disparate treatment. It was not labeled as disparate treatment, but when it was labeled as unnecessarily stopped and detained complainant, that's what I was talking about. Because in my mind, the racial components to this particular allegation were together with the, that she was unnecessarily stopped and detained by the officers. And when I had the conversations with IA, and we always have conversations with IA always informs us about, when the case is going to go to the next step of full investigation, if they're going to decline the allegation or not. They always fully let us know. And I and the lieutenant had this discussion. We saw differently on it, and I respect that lieutenant, and IA, under its authority, can, decline particular allegations. I disagree with it, and I told that lieutenant at the time, but I felt that IA did a good investigation, and just throughout the process, I signed off on each additional step, and I felt the process has been fair. To answer the chair's question about Mr. Bordeaux's testimony and interview. I mean, the way these CRC appeals are set up by allowing witnesses to testify at the CRC hearing to bring information to the CRC, that automatically creates a situation where the CRC is hearing information that the fact finder didn't have. And your whole standard of proof is based on, supported by the evidence. So the fact finder didn't have that evidence. So if the CRC is saying, we're not going to pay attention to Mr. Bordeaux, which you don't have to take a vote on that. If the CRC is saying that we're not going to pay attention to Mr. Bordeaux, then we don't need to do an investigation. But if what he says, or what he said to us right now is going to have an effect, then I think just for the process sake, and every time we've had additional witnesses, there's usually been some sort of additional investigation by somebody. So at least I would feel comfortable, I would not feel comfortable with CRC proceeding based on just additional testimony that the fact finder did not have ability to kind of weigh in their decision making.
Are you going to weigh in on that?
I'm not going to weigh in. I'm simply going to refer to the CRC to code language that provides guidance in this instance. That would be useful.
Go ahead.
Under your appeal 3.21.160E, at the end, the last sentence says that when the committee's review process develops new information, the committee may consider the new information when determining if additional investigation is warranted. but the committee may not incorporate the new information in the evidentiary record the committee considers when determining if a finding is supported by the evidence. That's
Right, no, I'm really clear that it would be beyond our scope to consider Mr. Bordeaux's testimony. What I'm not clear on is whether or not, I'm curious about the response. Mr. Bordeaux has alleged not only no effing rates, but then calls her a black bee, which, if that is true, would likely be a manifestation of disparate treatment, and whether or not the powers that be on this side of the equation want to do a thorough investigation into that, or would like us to proceed forward. So that's why I was trying to offer an opportunity, and I don't need an answer right now. I'm happy to take a break and allow people to chat. But it seems new information that is relevant to at least one allegation that's before us, rudeness, and could go beyond that. And again, I understand at the time of the case file review, I wasn't overly concerned about Mr. Bordeaux not being interviewed because I made the same assumptions that I think Mr. Courtney did. But now that we have additional information, folks over there may want to respond to that, think about it. Let's move forward with questions and discussion. Are there other questions?
I have a question. When you were giving your presentation, Lieutenant Elmore, you mentioned something about medical reports showed only a cold.
Yes.
Can you tell me, did you get medical records? Where'd you get the information?
This comes from of my finding, page 2, the last paragraph. During the Ms. Haynes reports that she did go to the emergency room after the incident. During that emergency room visit, she did not receive x-rays or physical injuries, but was treated for a common cold. Internal Affairs Report, page 4, line 13 through 22. The investigator mailed Mrs. Haynes all the documents that you need to document your injuries and verify them through a doctor, and those doctors were never completed by Mrs. Haynes.
So we have no medical, Internal Affairs received no medical records.
Yes, that's correct.
I guess, so where did the information?
Her testimony. He's saying from her testimony.
Excuse me.
You're saying you got that from her testimony.
I got that from the interview by Investigator Courtney.
Okay.
With Ms. Haynes?
Yes, during that, Haynes reports that she did visit an emergency room after the incident.
Ms. Haynes, I'm sorry to interrupt. You talked about sustained medical injuries due to the officer's conduct, and you should have copies of that. So we don't have copies of that. Do you think that you provided medical records?
Oh, what that was on last week of my hearing, I called and had faxed into Kelsey Lloyd, who's my MRIs, and she was supposed to give to you all today.
So you provided medical documentation to Kelsey Lloyd, who works at IPR, around the time of your, when did you do that?
It was right in the process of my hearing.
Like last week, maybe?
Yeah, the last hearing I was at.
Last
hearing,
case
last
file review.
Wednesday.
Wednesday, last Wednesday.
Yes.
Okay. And, yeah, we don't have that, and, I guess I hadn't heard any information about that.
I don't have any information on that.
Okay. But you faxed that to me?
No.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. Lieutenant Elmore, in terms of this search, it seems to me there are two searches here. There is a search of the backpack and a search of the pat-down frisk of a person, so search of person, search of property. And I'm wondering, as the decision maker, I'm not entirely clear what the exception exception to the warrant rule was, in the Bureau policy, around if it was instant to arrest or if it was for officer safety. And if those are different for the search of the property versus the search of the person. And I'm wondering if you can.
I can read from the, oh, wait a minute.
Well, the environment of the officer safety portion, which I can explain to you, when the individual reached for the backpack, that's when the officer safety came into effect. And they took her hands and controlled her, and I think at that point in time, they put handcuffs. And after that, search incident to arrest, they searched the backpack as they're looking for evidence of the crime, per se. And that was the difference between the two. You can ask permission to search, and if that permission is not granted, you wouldn't. But search incident to arrest, yes, they did search. But the pat down came prior to that, and that's for officer safety, just for, not for evidentiary purposes, but just weapons and so on. And so I think there's a difference between the pat down and a frisk, as you may be thinking about, maybe different, where you're intrusively, as I said, was not intrusive, it's going into pockets and so on, in my finding. Do you remember that? Here. This hand reports that she requested a female officer conduct a search incident to arrest. Officer A and B reports that Haynes was searched for officer safety. The search was probably a pat down more than an intrusive search.
All right, and I'm sorry, maybe you keep saying pat down, I keep saying frisk, and I'm using frisk because it's listed under the
Yes.
police procedure,
Correct.
which is a cursory pat down type physical search.
It is. Same term.
So frisk and pat down.
Same thing.
Same thing. I just want to make sure we're on the same
Yes.
page there. Okay. Other questions? Okay. So CRC discussion, and I don't know if, before we get to a vote situation, I would like to offer an opportunity, and I'm not seeking to rush internal affairs and IPR to contemplate my query, but whether or not with this new information, you are electing to do an additional investigation and want to do that, if we could. Typically, I don't want a quick answer from you on some of these things, but I would request that you consider making a quick answer tonight on that particular issue. So, we can go forward with our discussion, and then take a break. Will people amenable to that one? Hearing no objection, let's move forward. Discussion. Rochelle, what are you thinking?
Well, I'm thinking that I'm hoping that they will decide to do a further investigation. Because it seems to me like we're looking at something that started maybe because Miss Haynes was a person of color, and they were looking for a person of color. And so that's why they focused on her. And if in fact they said any of the things that she said they said, and her son said they said, it needs to be investigated. I'm really bothered by, Jeff talked about this earlier, about when an officer is asked during these investigations, did you say this? And the officer says, I don't recall. That implies to me that at some time in his life, he did say these kinds of things, and I just don't recall if I said it this time or not. He didn't ever say, I absolutely would not say that, I would never say that, under any circumstances, I would not say that. Now, Officer B did say A didn't say it, but A didn't say he didn't say it. And the I can't recall thing is bothersome in this particular situation.
Other discussion?
About that or other
Just in general.
things? Yeah, I have problems with the search of the backpack, so I'll kind of go through my rationale here. In investigators Courtney's interview with Officer A, he says, I asked Officer A about the searching of the complainant or appellant's backpack and if it was done incident to arrest or for items of evidence. He told me, quote, well, for arrest. And you know, it's kind of the belt suspender thing. We arrested her on a different charge, but now we're now also looking for evidence that we could have arrested her for to begin with. We had enough with that clothing and proximity to the case to actually just grab her and arrest her at that time. I don't think that's true, but that's what he said. We were trying to be a little more cordial. And then further back in the when they were talking about the search or asking about identification, Officer A says, was actually being very cordial and nice. He went on to say, you know that, and basically we at that point, with the proximity of the call and the time and her description, we have probable cause to even place her in a car until further, but we've kind of kept it more of a low-key PC type, stop type of thing. So I basically told her, you know, I'd like to get her name, and she got it on the telephone, and I said, you know, please get off the telephone and give me your name so we continue with what? Our investigation. She didn't comply at all. I said, well, if you don't want to give me your name, I'll search you for your name and get your name out of the backpack. And she reached for the backpack real quick, and so we just kind of grabbed her. So from what I got, Officer A intended to get her name and her ID out of that backpack no matter what she said. And there was intent right there to go in that backpack and get that identification. Because he says, you know, I'm going to search your backpack for your name. And in Oregon, because I looked this up to make sure, there is no statutory obligation for a person to provide identification to a police officer. There is in Nevada, but not in Oregon. So you can't search you for your ID, you can't go in your backpack looking for your ID. You don't have to provide a name. I mean, eventually they'll get it away out of you. I forgot what else I was going to say. Oh, and so they arrested her on 2 charges. One was interfering with a police officer, and the elements of that charge are you refuse to obey a lawful order by a police officer. He says, please get off the telephone. I don't take that as being an order. I take that as being a request. And give me your name. She didn't have to give the name. That's not a lawful order. So I'm thinking, at least in my mind, that the search of the backpack is not valid and it's a violation. I do believe that could have held her, even handcuffed her, put her back in the police car, and had the people come by and take a look at her. That's fine. I mean, that's, you know, she may have done it. Who knows? But they didn't have a right to search her backpack without a warrant or exigent circumstances. That's where I stand on that.
Just to be clear, are you talking about the improper search allegation?
And your concern is about the backpack and not the person?
Yes. Yeah.
Other discussion?
Well, as I said before, I have a problem with the identification in the first place. That, she did not meet the description of the person they're looking for. It is quite obvious that witnesses may not properly describe the person that they should be looking for, but the police then are left with a random selection of people on the street to decide who to talk to. And at the very least, this was a random stop. She was far enough away from the description of the person they're looking for that it seems to me that the stop was not reasonable in the first place. So I guess Michael and I differ on that.
Anybody else?
I guess I disagree. I would, my biggest problem is actually with the rudeness complaint. I would probably vote to uphold the search and the force against both officers. I would vote even without getting new investigation and new information from the son to vote to change the rudeness allegation. He did more than just say he didn't recall. He admitted saying something off the wall, which to me sounds like something my kid would say as a way to not admit something that they did. I mean, to me, that's not reasonable to look at that and think that it's exonerated. I think at least to go to unproven on that is where I would come down right now.
Yeah, I would, if we were to vote tonight, I'd go to unproven on everything. I don't know whether we'll be sending it back or not, but I don't think it's going to make a difference ultimately, because even if you take into account everything that the son said, and you give that equal weight with the appellant, we have two people saying one thing, and we have two people on the other side saying just the opposite. And I think that that does not tilt heavily one way or the other. I think it leaves us with, I wasn't there, I don't know who to believe. There's a few credibility issues on this side. As you just pointed out, there may be a credibility issue there. I don't think that it was reasonable to exonerate under those circumstances any more than it would be reasonable to sustain under those circumstances. So I would see it as unproven all the way around. I see the case kind of breaking in two ways. And one is, there's what happened on the street, and I say that's unproven all the way around. We weren't there, we don't know, the evidence is balanced to me. But I see a bigger issue here that goes beyond the appellant, and that's the process. And that's not up for vote tonight, and that's not what we're here for, to decide about, well, was it a good process or bad. We're here to decide about whether it was a reasonable finding by the argument. But so much of what's troubling so many people here could be avoided if it didn't get cut off right at the front end when it's such a controlling issue. And the stop, I think that the stop would have taken care of itself if it had been investigated. But the fact that it never was fully investigated leaves us going, well, I don't think she looked close enough, or that might have been racial profiling. And everybody here, the audience, us, everybody is left with a little bit of a weird taste in their mouth because we never vet that. We never shine the light on that key issue, that big elephant in the room. I think you do yourself a favor. I think you do IPR a favor, Internal Affairs, the Bureau, the union, the citizens a favor to say, yeah, let's damn well take a look at that. Because if there's something there, we want to stop it. I don't think there was something there. I read the record very carefully a couple of times, and I think there was a very close association between the description and the appellant, and even the appellant says that the witnesses to the mailbox crime also thought there was a very close comparison. I think that issue would have taken care of itself. But we didn't get there. We cut it off up front, and we have to stop doing that, because that's what makes it seem like we're hiding something when we're not. And what leaves it even more sour taste is, I'm just going to say it was inappropriate that a prior case involving the son was in that case file when we went to Internal Affairs. That, whether it was an accident or a deliberate decision, it was an inappropriate thing to do. And I walked away thinking, wow, you know, I'm a trial attorney, that's reversible error. That is reversible error. And it felt like you were trying to tilt us. And so I would find out who made that mistake and have a little debriefing with them, because that was wrong. And then when you did know that there was somebody else who was a witness, an ear witness, you made a decision not to interview. And that's wrong. Interview. I don't think it would change my decision. I'm pretty dug in on unproven here. But interview them. Don't cut off the first claim that it was a bad stop. Check it out. Reach a decision on that. And interview the guy who says he heard what happened on the phone. If he was there and he was blind, but he could hear it, he was standing right there, would you have interviewed him? Or would you say, oh, he's a blind guy? No, you didn't. So that's where I come down.
Other discussion? Mr. Bissonnette?
Man, on the allegations of unnecessary force, to be honest, I don't know, I have to hear sort of debate when we get to the vote, where I am on that, I'm still sort of up in the air. In terms of the improper search, you know, where I'm getting hung up, and I'm clear, you know, with the question that Mr. Yarosh asked during our case file review, and that was my understanding of where the female officer was, that she hadn't responded to the scene, or at least not in front of us. That's not what's in the finding, and so what we're trying to figure out is, you know, can a, you know, does the decision maker make a reasonable decision? And what I'm struggling with is, you know, however, during this incident, a female officer had responded to the scene. She did, you know, and we can talk about before or after, but I'm kind of looking at sort of the basis of the decision of the command staff. And again, since the female officer was on the scene, officers A and B should have taken the opportunity to use her to search the appellant after she requested a female officer. Using the female officer would not have significantly delayed or inconvenienced the officers and may have helped to pacify the appellant. But then it's like I recommend the search of the appellant was in policy and appropriate, but wanted the briefing. And I guess I'm really kind of struggling with all of those things and then saying, oh, but it was within policy because, and we can talk about this through the policy part, I actually think the policy is pretty weak. I don't know when you violated that policy. If you recommend, and it sure sounds like the command decision maker, you know, is recommending that female officer should have been used, so you might want to, you know, address that, but I'm struggling with that. The other one on the rudeness, while Dr. Silver and I are focused on the same thing, I don't know if he's ever said anything, but what he did say was, I said something off the wall to her, and I don't recall what it is, but it wasn't what was alleged. I don't believe, I don't recall, and to me, that is, you know, sort of the prima facie definition of unproven, and so of all of these, I'm really close to unproven on that one, but still open.
Well, I guess in terms of approaching Ms. Haynes and talking to her, I disagree with some of the statements I've heard. My view is that that there are. It was hard to know from the officers responding who this eyewitness was, what they saw, what good an angle they had on this individual. So they identified them as a short individual with a black jacket on, with a black backpack, and a sort of cream-colored beanie cap. And I appreciate Ms. Haynes bringing her clothing here today because that offers us a great visual of what she was wearing. And I can imagine that some people would describe that backpack as black, some people would describe it as black with white flowers. I don't know how quickly the description was going on, etc. And there was a debate or a different description of the color of the cap in the investigation. And maybe I'm just not great at describing colors, but I might have called the cap you put on this evening as sort of cream colored, maybe beige cream colored. So I think just in terms of all that she was wearing and the description they had, and she's a short individual, and if it's a cold day and she's got the hood up and it's a bulky jacket, you wouldn't be able to see a lot of her form underneath that jacket, so it would be hard when initially approaching her to identify her gender. That all of that could have led to the beginning of the discussion, and I respectfully disagree that when they determined this was a woman versus a man, and probably a woman of African American descent versus a Hispanic, that would have just sort of ended the conversation. You absolutely got it wrong. So I thought it was I was struck by how no one tried in the investigation, tried to sweep that under the rug or not just address it head on. You know, the description we got was a thin Hispanic male. The person that we approached was a short African-American woman wearing the same description, wearing the same clothing or similar to clothing, and so we proceeded forward to investigate. I thought that was, that to me was compelling and seemed honest and seemed like we're not gonna, you know, brush over the fact that it was a Hispanic male report and we were talking to a black woman. So that was my reaction to that, which we're not really here about because that wasn't the first investigation, but that was my response to that. In terms of the rudeness, I think there is additional information here which I certainly think is worthy of an investigation. I hope that we don't have to vote on that. I'm hoping that the Bureau and ICARE will want to take that on their own. But you know, that's certainly enough information for the Bureau to make a different decision than exonerated, potentially. And I hope they will look into that. As for the use of force, you know, there's the description by both the officers is that they did not take Ms. Haynes down to the ground. She indicates very clearly that she was. The more I do these reviews and hear more about the policy and hear the control holds and the ways the police describe these things, I just think that citizens and police have different views, especially uninitiated citizens who've never been stopped and put into a control hold by a police officer, that lead to these very different views of these interactions. It would seem a violent interaction to me, as I've never been subjected to it, and I can imagine I'd be quite upset by it. I don't really have an explanation of why. I can't wrap my head around why Ms. Haynes remembers so clearly being pushed to the ground and why the officers state so clearly that it was control hold. Maybe we pushed her up near the wall, but she was never taken to the ground. In terms of the search, in reviewing Lieutenant Elmore's findings from October 23rd, 2012, I mean, so much of it seems to be talking about the pat-down and not the search of the property, which is the backpack. And the Bureau policy says that, as a general rule, searches require a search warrant. It talks about exceptions to the general rule, and it lists some of them, perhaps not an exhaustive list, but administrative, automobile exception, community caretaking, consent, emergency aid, exigent circumstances, hot pursuit, instant to arrest, parole, probation, protective sweeps, and stop and frisk. So the only exception that I see that would apply to this fact pattern would be instant to arrest. And she was arrested, as I understand it, not for mail theft, but for resisting arrest and interference with a police officer. Initially. There was only reasonable suspicion to talk to her based upon her dress, according to all the information, not probable cause to arrest on the mail theft. So I don't see her being arrested for mail theft, leading to the search. So I'm really still struggling with the search of the backpack, and I guess it would be instant to arrest, because it's not, I mean, grabbing her when she was lunging to the backpack, if that's what happened, would be, I understand officer safety issues there and having her restrained at that point. But once that exigency is over, then she is away from her backpack, she is handcuffed, and doesn't have access to the backpack. So I think that eliminates the exigent circumstance, and I'm left with instant to arrest. And I think that's a close call, but probably a reasonable person could believe that instant to arrest was the exception found there, and I'm inclined to find that I can't tamper with the Bureau's policy based upon that. So,
What about what Michael said about the arrest? Because there's no requirement to give an ID.
right, and I think that another reading, I mean, I hear what Michael said, and I'm sort of responding to it, which is, the other description that was given was, I mean, I agree, she's not required to give identification. The question is, did Officer A really want to get in their backpack just to get that, or something else? And when she lunged quickly for it and the officer doesn't know what's in the backpack, I think that is what led to the physical restraint. And then once they had her arrested and, you know, the appellant does say that she was fighting with them and she told us she was scared. They were hurting her. She felt frightened, but she acknowledges tussling with them and fighting back against them. That could give them probable cause to arrest her for resisting arrest or interfering with the police officer, one or the other. And once she's under arrest, they do have the right to search and seek arrest. So, if there's no further discussion, then we're going to take public comment, and then I'm going to ask for a brief break just to let the powers that be discuss whether or not they want to, of their own volition, look into Mr. Bordeaux's statements further. So, public comment of limited duration, and folks, I'm really not trying to cut people off, but I am trying to be reasonable with everyone's time here. So we started at 5:45, it's 8:45, so I'm going to try to keep people to about 3-minute statements at the max. Yes, sir.
The police didn't get the information from the ATM. The police didn't get the information from the telephone. The police should be sent back to investigator school.
Thank you, sir. Other public comments? Yes, sir.
So I want to touch on something that's been said, and I have to respectfully disagree with the chair here. If we have police that are working the streets that are unable to distinguish between a 5'6" Latino man and a 4'10" African American woman, then I think as a city we have a problem. Or, as I think is more likely in this case, if we have officers on the street using racial profiling as a pretext to stop and frisk folks, we've still got a problem. I don't know if it's a failure of training, of policy, or of an organizational culture, but I think that the Portland Police Bureau really needs to take a long, hard look at how they do their business. I think the challenge for me is that this case is extremely disturbing. I think most reasonable folks would agree with that. And I think it raises significant questions for me and should raise significant questions for the Bureau and the city about how law enforcement is done in Portland.
Thank you. Other public comments? Yes, ma'am.
My concern is that if the officers sincerely believed that a crime had been committed, a serious crime of theft from a mailbox, let's say stealing checks or some such thing, then I think their investigation should have been of a serious crime, not kind of a fishing expedition. I think they should have acted much more clearly and decisively to say, we're investigating you, we suspect that you have committed a major offense, and we need to take you in, you need to call your attorney, and then we will continue this serious investigation under different auspices.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Public comments could be directed to the chair. Even if they're about the chair, you just bring them at me, but let's direct them to me, please. That's how it needs to be. So, other public comments? Yes, ma'am.
To the chair. I just want to put into context what the officer said here and I'm sorry that Lisa has to hear it from me in this way, but I just wanted, what I believe the context was when they said that she was kicking when they were using, it seemed that they were using a prior incident with outside of the transit center as a basis for, I don't know, discounting or her, I think that was in terms of rudeness, I can't remember which our allegation it was referring to. But when they said that she was allegedly trying to kick the windows out and calling the police Satan, you know, I don't know if that happened or not, but I do believe that that was a case in which her son was tased very, very severely, and I mean, I think at that time she perceived almost to death and was dogpiled by multiple police officers, And so I don't know if you guys have, since that was referred to, I just wanted to put that context, so I don't know if you have any access to that case. So since that was used as almost like a characterization to, or to kind of call into question her actions later, I just wanted to put that context in order, because what she was reacting to, perhaps, seeing her son being very, very, very violated. So I just want to say that.
Thank you.
I just have one question. You have 2 officers that are advertised for 5 feet or taller with a 4 feet 10 woman. They standing right in front of her. How can they fear for their life when they could kick the bag away? And plus, if they have sensitive training, most women get emotional when they feel threatened. How come training didn't kick in to have a little empathy because this woman felt threatened from 2 men who are well trained at 10 o'clock in the morning not to kick the bag away or just say, ma'am, don't do that?
Thank you. Other public comment? Yes, Ms. Burke.
I just wanted to follow up on what you said. When Lieutenant Elmore began his comments tonight, he made mention of the opponents being on her way to quarter community service, and I think that was inappropriate. And also, what concerns me about the series of interactions that have been described is it sounds to me a lot like the appellate was trying to assert constitutional rights, and in fact, it sounds like she was trying to do things that we teach people to do in Know Your Rights trainings. We teach people that they don't have to identify themselves to police officers, but that they may be detained if they refuse to do so. And so her question, she was never informed, as you were saying, Rochelle, she was never informed. She was trying to assert her rights, but she wasn't given a context in which to do so, and it escalated the situation unnecessarily. And it's terribly concerning to me, as a person who does Know Your Rights trainings, that there's some disconnect there between trying to assert your rights and the officers recognizing it as that. Instead of, as Lieutenant Elmore commented, most people have no problem with that. Well, we are trying to train people to assert their constitutional rights and do have a problem and do question why they're detained by police officers.
Other public comment? Yes,
Yes, I'm still concerned about the stop, but I think that's been discussed enough and appropriately tonight. I do think there was racial profiling involved. And I also wanted to bring up, as she did, that when Lieutenant Elmore gave his original statement, he made the statement that where she was going and that there had been some past behavior on her part. And that's totally irrelevant, and I also think prejudicial and probably very inappropriate.
Other public comment?
One right here. I'm out watching a lot of times in the city what goes on and with the police interactions, and I see a lot of times people are approached by the police and ask, and it's been done to me numerous times, what's your name? Can I see some ID? Where are you going? Sort of questions like that. I don't have to show ID in a way of knowing my rights and trying to be respectful. If there was a question that they need to detain her, if she was being detained, they should have made it really clear from the start. Because when you're first approached by cops, they come up to people all the time and what's in your bag, what are you drinking, engaging in conversation. And you have a right to say, I don't want to talk. I think that's what she was trying to do. Had it been a serious issue involved, it should have been known right then and there. Because what's happening in this room, I think, is happening a lot in the city regarding policy. And not a lot of it comes into rooms where we can talk about it and look deeper at it. But this type of thing of questioning, it doesn't quite go right. It's all a conversation that immediately turns into an arrest. It's a fine line, and it should be more clarified by the police. You are being detained. I do need to see your ID. And I don't think that was clear from what I got and tonight, but in listening.
Thank you. Other public comment?
Hi, Chair. I was wondering perhaps why the other female officer wasn't interviewed. She was there during the show up. Ms. Haynes did say that she was forcefully pushed in front of them and humiliated in a sense, so it would have been helpful to have just a statement from that officer if she was there during that time. I also have an issue with the officer safety allegation, as in the CRC summary, it states that Officer B stated that Officer A offered to get her ID out of her backpack for her and lunged toward the backpack, and in response to that, according to Officer B in the CRC summary, she reached for her bag. That seems like officers are creating the predicate for an officer safety exception. So that's one of the issues I have. And also with regard to the frisk, usually if you feel something in your pockets, I mean, did the officers state they felt something in her pockets so that they could go in it? That wasn't really clear if they ever felt anything justified going into her pockets to me. So that was a concern of mine.
Thank you. Other public comment?
One of the things, let me say again, was there actually a crime committed? Like, was there actually someone going through mailboxes and opening them, taking the mail away? Because it kind of feels like this is a waste of resources where officers are just detaining someone in a suspicion of something of a crime that might or might not be happening. And if there was actually a crime, then is there an open investigation currently going within that neighborhood of a person actually going through a mailbox, opening the mailbox and taking the mail?
So these are comments, not necessarily question time. So I appreciate your public comment.
It is kind of a comment, but.
Very well. Other public comment?
Sorry, one more thing. Just when the officer, when Mr. Bigham was going through the officer's testimony, how he said one of the officers said he had probable cause to arrest her right then, but there was no criminal activity verified. There was no proof of mail theft, so it's kind of concerning that he said that he would have already had probable cause to arrest someone at that point. And that concerns me because they're pulling, stopping people that this disparate difference in appearance, I would be concerned that I could get arrested at any time.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna just ask for a brief break and ask IPR and Internal Affairs if they could put their heads together or want to take anything back for additional investigation of their own accord. And we'll be back on in, is 5 minutes sufficient?
Or less, 5 would be perfect.
Okay, so great. We're about to be back on the record. We're live. Thank you, we're back on the record. I'm not sure who I'm looking to. Captain Famous or Mr. Severe?
I believe Captain Famous wants to make a statement.
First of all, the question about the 2011 report being in there, that was obviously inappropriate for it to be in there, and perhaps the director kind of talked about that, but I don't want to offer up any excuses. It got missed all the way down the line, and so no matter how it got in there, it stayed in there as it went through the review, so it's inappropriate that it's in there. Perhaps we have an explanation for that. Internal Affairs, as the captain of Internal Affairs, I take these allegations and some of this information that has come out is very concerning. And so what I'd like to offer is that Internal Affairs will conduct additional investigation. Some of the issues that I see, and perhaps you could provide to the IPR director in writing, they can kind of give it to me in a formal way. But I see the son of the appellant's testimony over the phone. Perhaps we'll look at, again, if the white female officer was interviewed. I also heard about medical records being presented to IPR prior to this appeal hearing, and as far as I know, Internal Affairs hasn't received that, so I'd like to be able to review those myself. Allegations 6 and 7, if there are ways that either you or the IPR director want to craft those for my review, I'm certainly wide open to that. It will necessitate, as always, a supplemental finding by East Precinct, in this case Lieutenant Elmore, and I'm sure that the lieutenant will do his best to expedite that as we do our supplemental investigation. We'll present that to IPR for review, and certainly they can help us manage that. I'll present it to each precinct and we'll get that moving through the process as expeditiously as we can. But I would ask you to take some time, a day or two or whatever it is, to make sure that the information that I receive includes everything, your concerns, and again, new information that you are requesting Internal Affairs to conduct, and we will do that in a timely manner.
Thank you. So within a day or two, if you've tipped your hat as to the things that interest you and that you would like to take on your own, and you are inviting the CRC to put into writing to IPR to pass along, or I guess we extended to both of you, thoughts that we have.
What I'm requesting is whatever additional investigation you would like to have conducted, if you could formally have that presented to me, and I will have a formal response, and most of that is going to be a supplemental investigation, from what I understand at this time.
And then in terms of, if you could, sorry to be daft, you referenced allegations 6 and 7. What were you suggesting?
Well, you know, I heard discussion around fair treatment proceeding. I've heard discussion around, you know, the way the allegation is worded, Officer A unnecessary stopping detained the complaint. Now, that could mean a lot of things. There's nothing in there that says anything about race. There's nothing in there in those allegations in Internal Affairs review as far as race allegations, or Lieutenant Elmore was tasked with presenting a finding on. So the reason I'm asking that, I'm assuming that you would review those, because if there's any language that you're concerned about, I would recommend that you present that to IPR, and that's related to Internal Affairs. So we're very clear about the additional investigation that you are asking for, and so we can provide that in a timely manner. So I just offered that up because I hear this talk about the stop and the allegation of concern around race. So I think that that should be addressed. There shouldn't be an elephant in the room. Sometimes if there is an elephant in the room, even though at this late stage, there's still time to do the right thing. If there's a right thing to be done, it'll be done.
Thank you, Captain.
There's a couple, I mean, not to interrupt you, but there's just a couple of things I just want to address.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you said Captain Famous.
Well, Famous had a portion that he wanted to talk about. FDR has its own stuff that it wants to talk about.
Okay.
The first thing, the information about prior incidents involving complainant and her son, that is IPR's fault, that is in there. And I would like to apologize right now to Ms. Appellant and her son for having that information in there. When we do our investigations, we just try to get as much information as possible at the beginning stage. That information wasn't really part of our information, and it shouldn't have been in the case file as for the context of this, because there's an appearance of it being prejudicial in that, you know, somebody is attempting to stack the deck, and that was not our intention to do that. We should have done a better job, and just I myself should have done a better job of taking that out. Additionally, on just kind of as like we kind of move along and doing these appeals, I just would like to thank the CRC for the work it's been doing tonight. It's been very helpful. You guys put in a lot of hours reviewing these cases and a lot of hours sitting here right now. It's, I think, after 9, and we're not anywhere near done, but believe it or not, this makes the process so much better. The effort that you're doing and the effort that the folks who are sitting here, being here, put into it makes it much better. It really makes my job easier, and I am not afraid of criticism, and I'm definitely not afraid of saying that I am wrong. I am wrong many times a day. So I just want to thank you guys for doing what you have done, and in the way that you've done it professionally and treated everybody with respect and equanimity. So I just want to thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Severe. So I think what I'm hearing from the Bureau is that they're open to doing additional investigation. That additional investigation could change the findings by the Bureau on any and all of these. There could be new allegations, et cetera. So I think it's premature then to take a vote on anything before us today.
Do we need to vote on sending it forward for the investigation?
Yeah, I guess we could take a formal vote to send it back for additional investigation, but they've sort of jumped,
Trying to be proceed.
yeah, jumped us on that, which I appreciate. So I will make a motion to send the case back for additional investigation. Is there a second?
Second.
I'll take a second and a third from Dr. Silver. This and that. All in favor of that recommendation, please state aye. Aye. You're right.
What?
Before we take any vote, we'll take public comment. Public comment?
Oh.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to let everyone know I appreciate everyone's time and effort being done to look at my mother's case and hours and manpower and resources it takes you guys to use it. I have a very difficult job, and I want to commend you for taking the time out of your lives to look at cases and you're looking at a solution. And I just want to tip my hat to you guys for giving them a fair trial and a chance to get the facts out. I appreciate what you guys do.
Thank you. Additional public comment? Yes, ma'am.
I would humbly request that there be some deadline for the supplemental investigation to be completed.
Okay. Thank you for your public comment. Other public comments? Okay. All in favor of the motion for additional investigation, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries unanimously. This means that we're losing Mr. Bigum. And,
Sorry to see you all guys go. Oh, I'm sorry.
We'll be pulling the other three in. And how do folks, I sincerely appreciate Captain Famous's and Mr. Spears' openness to our input. How do people want to provide that input? Do you want to?
Well, I think we should appoint those people to write it up and we'll publish it.
A letter.
So we can, and I can assign people to write it up. The question is, who wants to take charge of that, and how are we all going to give our input?
Well,
Typically, if we're doing an additional investigation, we have a conversation, we vote. They only have to consider a formal request for additional investigation if there are a majority vote. I hate to be detail oriented and stick to the rules, but they kind of.
Why don't you delegate it to 2 or 3 of us and we'll come up with a draft? Everybody
But that doesn't allow for sort of the public discussion. I actually think there was a pretty good list of issues, and I guess I'd ask, does anybody else have anything that they wanted added to the issues of, looks like maybe about half dozen or 7 issues that are there. The chair could read those. But if we had anything else, we should add them. But I don't think we can walk out of here tonight without sort of instructing what we want additionally investigated.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to keep us here all night either, but I agree with that. And then what I don't want is to have people have an additional investigation done and then CRC members say, well, that's not what I wanted this. They have a right for us to be clear about that. So what I heard Captain Famous say is that the son's testimony this evening is something they're going to follow up on, which I fully endorse. The female officer looking to interviewing her received medical records that have been provided by IPR. Being provided to IPR to get those. And I guess I would say if there are any additional medical records, there's been a request for those for some time. So now would be the time to hustle and get those in, because that could lead to prompt further investigation. It's been requested by at least one member of the public. There's openness to looking at whether or not disparate treatment is an allegation that should be looked into.
I think that as a result of interviewing the son, based on what was said today, that the officers will have to be re-interviewed too.
Right, I assume that. I
Well,
care from the other-
I don't know if we can assume
Oh,
anything.
okay.
They know
I just, what I was gonna say, yeah, I dot the i's and cross the t's.
We would do a thorough, attempt to do a thorough supplemental investigation. So we don't use the email we get for your review.
Okay. Let's just put the disparate treatment out there. What are people?
I think it's
Yes.
worth that.
I just sent you an email because this is my last appearance before the CRC. I think it's 344.05 is the discrimination procedure. So you might take a look at that and just review it in terms of, is that the one, if there are to be allegations of disparate treatment, is that the one that you're going to look at? Because I think it was originally something else, which,
courtesy.
huh?
Just as
Courtesy,
unnecessary
yeah.
as not.
And I'm almost out of juice here, but.
Okay. So I heard Mr. Denicky practically volunteered to write this up for us. Is that right, Mr. Denicky?
I will certainly help out.
And then you could just email the rest of us and I'm sure it'll be fine.
Got it.
I would feel much more comfortable if we read the list of specific requests, and that way both we and the public will have a clear sense of what we're asking, and then what we're then sort of debating is sort of the wordsmithing of those specific topics. But what I don't want is to have in the development of the letter say, oh, we should add this, because I think that would be outside the bounds of sort of our public process. So if we could.
So I have the female officer, the son, the medical records, recrafting 6 and 7, and disparate treatment and/or courtesy.
And could we be more specific about what we're recrafting 6 and 7 to?
Well,
Right now it says unnecessarily stop and detain conduct. We could either replace those with stop and detain complainant due to her race, disparate treatment. Or we could just reword them.
So Mike, I'm looking at the policy book here. I see 344.00 and 344.05. 05 is the bias-based policing.
That's the one I was thinking of, 344.05.
And 00 talks about not engaging in prohibited discrimination on the basis of including race. And so,
Hold on, let me get my book out here again.
I mean, specifically, the issue that came to light for me this evening was based upon Mr. Bordeaux's statement that not only did he hear an officer say to the appellants, you don't have any effing rights, but then he also described her as a black derogatory term.
Well, what 344.05 says is, members are prohibited from stopping, detaining, or searching persons under 810.410 when the action is solely motivated by the member's perception of the person's race, color, sex, or national origin.
Right, and 344.00 says examples of prohibited discrimination, verbal or physical conduct, willful or negligent use of epithets or slurs against any person on the basis of membership in a protected class.
That's 05 or
00. So
why not 0?
Comments?
Yeah, I guess you need to decide, or whoever, if there is a problem, which one it lies with, or with both, as David said. Because I don't know.
Well, both can be considered.
I think both could be considered, and then IPR and Mr. Severe, would it be IPR coming up with allegation?
IPR, what my advice would be, because, allegation formation is basically is my profession. I was not trying to rhyme, I promise you, when I was saying that, but I can break my head against walls trying to figure things out. I would just suggest to you folks that you say that you would like us to reform those allegations or take a look at those, and we will do that. And I'm personally committed to changing the allegations in 6 and 7 and forwarding that to the CRC in this particular case, because it's gone to an appeal, to just show you what we're working on, because I think that'll be easier as opposed to trying to craft an allegation by committee at this particular date and time. I think that's a very hard task for anybody to do.
Right, I think allegation formation by committee is a holistic idea and should not be done, so thank you for saving us. And I would point you to 344 and 344.05 in considering how to construct the allegation. And I very much look forward to you sending those to us before they're referred on for investigation, so we can make sure we're on the same page. Okay. Does that work for you? Delightful. Wrap up comments by CRC members of the public. Dr.
Well,
Silver?
I think that I'm delighted about what's happening. I think we need to send a letter to the new members and ask them to read the case, listen to the case value review, and listen to the review, which is asking a lot. Otherwise, we have to go with six members.
Okay. How about an email rather than a letter?
Oh, okay. Well, same thing to me.
Okay. Other wrap-up comments? Public comments? We're adjourned.